funny you say that. I was literally thinking to myself, I was like giggling. I'm like, watch this be the government, like low key fucking with us. But I'm like, no, I shouldn't say that because I'll sound like a conspiracy theorist.
I mean, trust me, one of the things they're really good at is this right here, suppressing truth and things.
I
That
actually
isn't
can't
that.
believe that happened.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, guess
I'm
what?
genuinely embarrassed.
I mean, you're not the platform. So, the thing I will tell you is there's no more echo, so that's nice.
That's a positive. Okay, so if we'll just let people come back in for a minute.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to touch anything on my phone just in case. I'm not trying to freaking start tweaking at me, but
this is what happens to people that are engaged. Just it's the married life now.
Is it?
It is. Yeah, it is. That's what happens. What do you think? Like, I literally left the house, tried to go to the store, and had no wallet at all whatsoever. There's only one factor that's changed in my life in the last 72 hours. So I mean, I blame it on that. It's new energy in your life, you know.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, someone's advising you to please not throw your phone across the room.
I'll try. Yeah, I actually don't. That's actually never happened to me. I've used YouTube for 5 years. I've never experienced that. So I apologize, guys. My bad.
Well, I will tell you this. There was 2 weeks ago, I was doing a YouTube live, and I said something about the fact that I had no women in my life, and a bunch of nurses came on and were messaging, and all of a sudden, it literally shut the entire live stream down. There was like so many thirsty nurses that came on. I'm not even kidding you. It shut the whole thing down. I was like, damn.
Too many thirsty nurses.
Yeah.
That's actually hilarious.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, because they have no idea what they would actually get if one of them actually did start dating me. They don't actually want that. I don't think. You know what I mean?
That's hilarious. Okay.
Yeah.
So now that we're back, we got our people back. JD, if you're in here, if you could just reshare this link to your page. I'm so sorry to do that to you. I've given him like 2 different links now. My bad. YouTube switched the first link on me. I don't know what happened. To be honest, I don't know. YouTube's out of whack today. But I guess since everybody has already technically been introduced, they've been here for all of our technical errors. I guess we will just jump right into it, and I'll ask you, how is it? So for those that don't know, Jason has been in prison for 8 years. He just got out 7 weeks ago. So what has it been like since you've gone out? Like, how are you reintegrating?
First of all, I must have gone on some sort of a transport device while I was in prison, because this is not the same planet that I was on when I got in jail. I will tell you that right now. It's a completely different planet. There's new words, an entirely new lexicon. One of the things Brother JD did for me immediately was school me up on all of these brand new words and things you can say and you cannot say and stuff like that.
Nice.
So there's been,
yeah, that's very different.
Right. There's been a very, very steep learning curve. The other thing is that's amazing is you're expected to go places and do things when you get out of prison. Well, I had no car, and I live in Alaska, and the public transportation system in Alaska is like, you can choose between a dog sled team, which shows up twice a day in the evenings, or you can try to hustle. Yeah, you can hustle your ass in snow boots across town, which is really impossible. So they have Uber now. So I started using Uber, and every single dynamic of life has a learning curve. I will tell you that right now. So by way of example, every time I got out of the Uber, they tell you to rate the driver. And I noticed they have 5 stars. So I would start by pushing the first star, and then the second star, and then the third star. Well, every time I pressed the first star, the screen would just go away. So I'm like, well, there's some kind of glitch in their system. Well, fast forward like 15 rides later, and the lady that picks me up, she's like, can I ask you a personal question? And I'm like, yeah, what's up? And she's like, why do you have the worst rider rating that I've ever seen of anyone ever? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, your rating is like 3.1. And I'm like, what? I'm always on time. I'm super polite. I don't leave trash in it. I can't. It turned out I was rating every single driver 1 star the whole time. giving them
Oh
all.
my God.
So they in turn were rating me as the worst rider ever of all time. And that's why I couldn't get an Uber driver to show up and pick me up anywhere. I was like, what the hell?
That's
So
crazy.
uh, I finally figured that out, and I no longer give Uber drivers 1 star anymore. So
It's a
um,
good start.
that's yeah, that's just one example of every single thing that has changed. And I will tell you this on a serious note: when you walk out of prison, the expectation is so high from the DOC that, and it's a very extreme expectation that they express very casually. And I'm telling you, bank accounts, driver's license, rent a house, get a job, all of the other things associated with being on ankle monitor. There are so many dynamics and layers to being out and hitting every single thing perfectly that I realized very quickly that it was only the exceptional human being, much less inmate, that could possibly hit every single mark correctly and get it done and not end up back in jail. So um,
Mm.
it's a challenge, but I've been doing well.
Do you think that that is like set up that way so that people will continue to go back to prison? Like, do you think it's designed that way on purpose, or
Um,
is it a flaw in the system?
yeah, I think systems are designed with purpose for sure. I think the people that are operating within that system now, they're not the ones that created it. They're just driving it.
Right.
But certainly, like you could put me in a position in DOC tomorrow, and I would alter 65 things to make it tilt it towards an inmate's success,
Mm.
because it's not tilted that way now. And interestingly, the state of Alaska has the single highest recidivism rate of any state in the United States. We're the worst. Um,
Wow.
and I totally see why. I understand why now. So, but I would like to put a little caveat on the end of all of that conversation and tell you the DOC has done an exceptional job of handling a radioactive circus clown of an inmate like myself. Um, to their credit, as much as they have been dragging their heels and fighting and struggling the whole way, they've done a really good job, and I'm blessed. So.
Well, that's good. So there's a lot of people, obviously, a ton of people still think that you're in prison. Also, really quick, just because obviously the live screwed up, if you guys want to be able to ask Jason anything directly, you can send the question in via super chat, and my moderator will track them. He will be sending them to me live. And at the end of um, our interview, before we're done the live stream, we will read the questions and Jason or you'll probably be for Jason though, because you're the guest. We will answer them live, just so you guys know. So there's a lot of people, number one, that think that you're still in prison. I'm seeing YouTube videos even as recent as 2 months ago of people talking about your story. And a lot of people think that you're still in prison. And the people that know that you're out seem to have this like impression that you're just like this super rich dude now. So what's the reality? Like what has it been for you working wise? Are you working? What's your day-to-day like since after prison?
Yeah. So the fact of the matter is, when you get out of prison, just so everybody knows, after a decade, I walked out of prison with a cardboard box. Um, and shout out to brother JD and family members out there in the YouTube family that contributed items for the house and things like that. But the fact of the matter is, I work 40 hours a week. I make 20 bucks an hour on a construction job. Um, that's another thing that's changed. Everything in this world is exponentially more expensive. I pay
Mm.
$416 a month for the privilege of being on EM. That's just a standalone cost. Um, and the struggle is extremely real. And I have nothing but gratitude, honestly, to the YouTube family and the other platform families that I've built, because it's people out there that have sent me something to sleep on, something to eat with, et cetera, et cetera. So
Wow.
um, I absolutely work my ass off, and in no way, shape, or form am I solvent or financially well off, but I intend to be at some point in my life. But at this point right now, literally, I work 70 to 90 hours a week between the social media stuff and then the 40-hour a week job. just trying to stand on my own 2 feet. And I
Yeah.
mean, like, JD paid my rent twice when I got out of prison. That's how flat on my back I started out. So yeah, the
JD's a
struggle,
good guy.
absolutely 100%. And that's something that most people don't know about him. He's not a stage banger. He doesn't just get on there and run his neck and talk about, people we don't like. He actually has skin in the game, and has come through numerous times to help me financially. He's been amazing.
Well, that's awesome. So, since you've gone out, obviously, before you went into prison and coming out of prison, probably another thing that's changed is how many people like recognize you. I was on the phone with you earlier and you were at the store buying something and like somebody recognized you. So, I mean, what is that like getting recognized? Like what is your, obviously like you're known for, hunting down pedophiles and like smashing them in the head with a hammer. How does that translate to your social interactions when people recognize you on the street? What's the number one thing that people kind of say to you or ask you?
Um, well, I mean, like, so today, after that one you saw, we were running in and out of Costco for my white monster habit to satisfy that addiction, which is something we can get into later. But I'm in the bathroom and I'm washing my hands, and somebody comes in, and the dude's like, "Oh my God, it's you, bro, here." And he sticks his hand out, and my hand is still soaking wet from the sink. And he's like, "I don't even care. I just want to shake your hand." Um, it's been extremely positive, and on a personal level, what it does is it reminds me to be accountable in my actions and how I conduct myself and stuff like that. And the reason why is because this community, the CSA community, was hungry for something that represented us winning the struggle against people that hurt us or injured us or molested us or whatever. And to be that image for a bunch of people is a really, really cool thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love it. I think it's great. I'm not a person that has had a ton of friends in my lifetime. I'm a very private person, and I really like it, especially youngsters. When I run into kids or teenagers or that recognize you, it's super cool. It's humbling.
Who recognizes you or who, yeah, like who, I guess who shares, who have you had share their story with you the most, men or women? Who have connected with you the
Um,
most, if it, or maybe equal?
yeah, it's a pretty even split. I will tell you this, like one anecdote during the years I was in prison, nearly a decade. I got probably close to 10,000 letters over the years from people all over the world. And I'm talking every country on this planet I've gotten mail from. Um, and it was kind of funny while I was getting letters, guys would be like, "Oh, bro, you're so lucky. You're getting all these babes writing to you. This is great." And what they didn't know is that typically these were 3 or 4 or 5 page descriptions of people's pain and what they went through as a child. And I realized early on that it was a responsibility on my part when somebody takes the time to share their pain with you in a very sincere way. I taught myself to process their experience because each letter dignified a proper response from me. And a lot of times these guys were sharing what happened to them for the first time with somebody outside of themselves. And it really, honestly, that was one of the most transformative parts of this whole experience for me is 10 years of processing other people's trauma. It really taught me a lot, and it gave me a lot of wisdom when it comes to this sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something about just like your story and the actions you took to like seek retribution against pedophiles who had otherwise seemingly got off like pretty easy. 'Cause there seems to be like, even with me, the first time that I met you and the first time I video chatted with you, like, I was like in tears, like sharing my story and sharing things that I hadn't even come close to speaking about since probably the age of like 13, 14, 15. So there's like something about that. But then afterwards, I felt kind of guilty because I was like, here I am placing all of my trauma and all my bullshit onto somebody who's like also been through it. So I felt like a little bit guilty. Do you find it to be hard sometimes? Does it affect you in a negative way?
Um, I don't know if it affects me in a negative way. Is it hard? Absolutely. It's extremely difficult. Um, but the way the process works is due to the fact that the primary symptom of child abuse is isolationism. We all wear these backpacks full of rocks, and that's our trauma, and we carry it around, and it affects us each in a different way. And the whole purpose of sharing your pain or your story with somebody else who understands is you take one of those rocks and you give it to them and they carry it for you. That's how it works. And so over the years, trust me, I've become a very strong person emotionally and spiritually because I'm carrying a lot of people's trauma. Trust me, I've been handed a lot of rocks the last 10 years, a lot, thousands. Um, and the thing is, you shouldn't spend one more moment feeling guilty for that because that is a blessing that we have with each other and around each other. That is the blessing of us finding each other. People that have survived that, that is the blessing of having that as a commonality, is we
Mhm.
carry the weight together.
True.
And a lot of times I do very difficult stories on my channel about kids that have been abused or kids that have been assaulted, and people will tell me like this was really hard to watch, and I encourage them and tell them I understand it's hard to watch, but that's what we're doing together. We're carrying this together. um,
Right.
and the reason why that's so important is because when you have a massive following and you build a massive community, that's power right there. And we can sit back and talk about how fucked up everything is and how terrible people are to kids, etc. But once you have that community, then you have the ability to actually affect real change, vote people out of office, change laws, stuff like that. And that's absolutely what has to happen on this planet for us to even have a chance of being happy.
I agree with you. What was the reaction in prison? I mean, obviously the pedophiles are like cordoned off, they're in PC or whatever, but I'm sure them hearing that you were coming to their prison probably probably had them shaking in their boots. What was it like? I assume you were obviously in Gen Pop. What was their reactions to you?
Well, I personally never closely interacted with any pedophile.
Mm,
The DOC in our system and the inmates, they're completely segregated somewhere else.
yeah.
Honestly, actually, it wasn't until the end of my bid and they moved me to a medium security joint. And in the state of Alaska, it's the only one in the country I'm aware of where they mix sentenced and unsentenced inmates in the same mods. Your roommate might be a guy that just got arrested last week, and I'm 9 years into my bid, and they're putting a dude that's coming off dope puking on the floor. It's crazy. It's insane. That was the only time, and by then I had already been granted discretionary parole. I had programmed, and that was one of the most challenging parts of my entire prison experience was the very end because now I'm expected to see these people um, and control myself and my conduct. And the way that I did it, if you want to know, if any one of these people was going by and tried to look my way or anything, I would tell them, don't fucking make eye contact with me. You look at the floor when you walk by me. Don't speak to me. Don't ask me anything, and we're going to be just fine. And that's how I personally had to do it.
Mm.
Um, but it was an interesting thing. Even now, up until today, coming out on ankle monitor, they had an extremely difficult time finding any place to house me because they wanted me in a transitional living center, and every single one was packed with people with crimes against children. And so I couldn't be housed there. I couldn't be housed there. It's the weirdest thing ever. I'm basically the reverse child predator. So now I'm the predator to the child predators, and there's so many of them everywhere that they couldn't put me anywhere. It's wild.
Yeah, one thing that really stood out to me, because I've researched a lot about, like, you and your story. And one thing that continuously shocks me is the panic that the system had about letting you out, and the danger that you were going to be to these pedophiles, but this type of energy doesn't seem to be given to the actual pedophiles. And in doing my research in the state of Alaska, like pedophiles aren't put on ankle monitors. They're not being monitored. They're not being monitored as to like where they're going, making sure that they're not at addresses where children are known to be frequented. But yet somebody who is like taking out the trash, so to speak, is like more heavily monitored, and is almost seen as like a higher risk than somebody that's out here hurting kids. And that just never really sit right
And it
with
shouldn't.
me.
Yeah, it shouldn't. It shouldn't sit right with you. It shouldn't sit right with anybody. However, this is the system that's designed and built. And I really want to hammer home the point how easy it is for us to sit back and say how terrible the system is and how broken it is. But it's a lot more difficult for us to get off our ass and do something about it. And the way we do that is by voting and things like that. But you're absolutely right. So interestingly, back in the day when I was doing my thing and moving about, I remember one time I called the Alaska State Troopers headquarters and I told them I'd like to come down and pick up a paper copy of the registry, so I can know where all of the registered sex offenders are in my area. And I went down and actually picked up a book, a printed book of all of them. And I'm going door to door. And I'm telling you now, probably 40% of the addresses I went to, the person that answered the door was not the person in the book, and that person no longer lived there, and that person had no longer lived there for some time and just didn't tell the cops their new address. And I remember calling the troopers back and telling them, hey, do you guys know that most of these people do not live at any of these addresses in the registry? And they said they were so under manpowered and underfunded that they literally did not have the capacity to do their job, which is to make sure these people were tracked and monitored, et cetera. Um, so why that sort of concern has been heavily leveraged on me as an individual, I can't really explain. I will tell you in truth, I have not broken the law in nearly a decade. I haven't broken the law in 10 years. I'm literally the single most reformed citizen that you're going to encounter. I don't speed. I have literally have not been arrested for anything in a decade. If
And
that's
you're
not
like the most watched, probably.
for
Isn't that
sure,
ironic?
100%.
What was what like with being such a, because you got notoriety pretty much right away, and there was kind of a mixed, the opinion from the public kind of went three different ways, and I'll get into that in a minute. But you know, you must have been sitting in prison like seeing yourself in the paper, and like how did your inmates treat you? Did they like give you their noodles and stuff like that? Were they
Right.
like giving you the extra commissary, and like what was that like?
So
Being
first,
famous in jail must be like very different.
yeah, being famous in jail sucks. It absolutely sucks.
Really?
Absolutely, it's terrible. So
Why?
number one, if you understand prison culture, respect is earned by what you did today. So granted, initially when I came in, the first 3 or 4 weeks in jail, there was definitely some inmates dapping it up and patting me on the back and whatever. But fast forward years later, I will tell you, in general, the inmates in our system are jealous, angry, judgmental, and there was a whole lot of haterism and a whole lot of ignorant judgment. And then the other thing too is keep in mind, I live in a concrete shoebox. I don't see the internet. I don't see the outside world at all. The state of Alaska system is heavily regulated. It's not like prisons that you see in the lower 48 where people have cell phones in their cell and everything else. There was no internet. So what that actually translated to in my world is you have COs that go outside the prison, and unbeknownst to me, these guys are all watching the internet and they're like, oh, he's a hero, huh? And then they come to work the next day and they see me and they're like, oh, there's Mr. Fucking Special right there. And so what it turned into for me
What the
was
fuck?
more cell searches, more UAs, more scrutiny, more trips to the hole. It was so intense for a period of years. And again, I had no perspective of the outside world. So in my head, I'm thinking like, why the fuck are these guys so on my helmet, man? They are on my ass. And I'm talking
Mm.
hardcore. What is going on here? And honestly, it wasn't until I got released and I got out here and I saw how huge the story was on the internet. That's when all of a sudden I connected all of the dots and I was like, okay, now I get it, because Lieutenant so and so is posting pictures of himself with his hunting trip and he's getting 3 views. And here's this jackass in the prison cell that has 1 million fucking likes or whatever. And they absolutely, not all of them, a good portion of them absolutely despised me for it.
Damn, I wish we'd all known that.
Real
I
talk.
feel like I feel guilty. I didn't know about you at the time. I only became aware of you. I don't know. I want to say maybe about a year ago. Here in Canada, we know you as the hammer wielding pedophile hunter. That's what we call you
Yeah.
here in Canada. That's how Canada knows you. So yeah, it was probably like about. Give me a sec, sorry. It was probably about like a year ago that I first heard of you. Now, mind you, 8 years ago, I wasn't on social media either. I only joined social media like 5 years ago. I was like 19 the first time I got Instagram or Snapchat or like anything like that. So
Yeah.
I pretty much blew up and learned how to use the internet that way. So I'm sure like everybody, I just wish people knew that. I
Yeah.
don't really understand. You would think that like, because the rest of us out here obviously see it as like taking out the dirty laundry, so to speak, but
Yeah.
it's a little strange that the reaction like wasn't that on the inside. But from what I understand, like being on the inside is everybody is so self-centered anyways, just kind of worried about like, their own shit, their own cases, their own time
Yep.
for doing. Like there's
Yep.
not a whole lot of like, oh, but this guy did good. Like there's not this abstract outward thinking,
Not at all.
from
And
my
I'll tell you
understanding.
this. Yeah, I was going to say, I'll tell you this. I actually found myself having to not speak about my case at all, not share anything about my world at all, because as soon as I walk in the room, that whole vibe of Mr. Special is here. Just it made things so difficult for me. So, like, what people don't know is I get all of these messages about how wonderful it was that your sister got on there and blew your case up all over the world and everything else. And much love and respect for her for everything she did for me. However, when I go up in front of the parole board, trust me, there's nothing they hate more than an inmate who thinks he's special. They despise that shit. So it made
Mm.
things 10 times more difficult because now I have all this notoriety, and at every turn it was criticism, judgment, analysis, because you realize the next step in that thinking is, oh, look what he did right there. He's not special. Oh, look what he did right there. He's hella disrespectful. Oh, look what he did right there. Like it was wild. And this is not like a woe is me story. Trust me.
No,
I
no, I
stood
know
I
that.
yeah, I stood on my square and I did awesome as an inmate and I did my time and did my thing the whole way. But I also want to mention very briefly before we go any farther, I'm watching your comments and I see a whole bunch of people talking about the guy that unalived people, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm telling you guys right now, I have never murdered anyone in my entire lifetime. So do your research, jump on Google, and you will find that I was convicted of first-degree assault. I viciously hammered somebody. I assaulted a number of other ones, but I didn't unalive anyone. So before you start running your neck, do some research.
Before you get him in trouble. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I've seen like a couple comments too of people who aren't familiar with you who are maybe coming in late. This is Jason. He's also known as the Alaskan Avenger in the media's eyes, in the social media's eyes, and he used the sex offender registry in Alaska to hunt down pedophiles and essentially, to put it nicely, give them a warning, evoke a little bit of fear into the pedophile community there. Because what I don't think a lot of people recognize is that Alaska has an extremely high, alarming rate of like pedophiles, and a lot of this pedophilia is targeted and committed towards like the indigenous youth.
Yeah.
So that's who who Jason is. Jason just spent 8 years, 8 and some change, right? Was it just 8 or 8.5?
Yeah, it was 8 years, 10 months.
Yeah, so he just spent almost 9 years in prison for it, and he's been out 7 weeks. So that kind of brings me to like my next question is like, what? Because you've spoken. I won't ask you to get into it. I don't think that's like super respectful. But what's known about your past is that you experienced quite a lot of abuse and isolation, and you also experienced molestation from your stepfather. So, obviously this trauma evoked, some strong feelings as it does for, I mean, whether you're a victim of it or not, I think pedophilia like evokes some strong feelings, but even more so for someone that was a victim of it. So without asking you to, go into details about your past and relive that trauma, I'd rather ask you, what was the defining moment that you said to yourself, I need to actually start hunting these guys down. This is how I'm going to do it. What was that moment? Do you remember the moment? Was a specific moment? Was there a buildup? What was it?
Well, I will tell you this, there is a seed that is planted in you when you're a young person and you're systematically molested or assaulted by an adult. It's just planted in you. That's the best way I can describe it. And many years ago, even before I came back to the state of Alaska, I just had this thing. I've always been a spiritualist. I'm in tune with the spiritual plane, for lack of a better way of saying it. And I would follow, I call it my internal compass. I would follow it places. And I found myself in Oregon, Washington, Montana, Idaho. And time again, I would find myself with the opportunity to intercede on behalf of a child in a very similar fashion. Um, and it was actually after an event like that in Bend, Oregon. I had a pretty big situation happen with some MS-13 guys that were running girls, young girls, out of a motel. And I had to move out of that part of the world. And I decided to come back home to the state of Alaska. And I thought to myself, like, if there's anywhere that'd be peaceful and cool and great for me to go, it's back home to the state of Alaska. I haven't been here in like 15, 20 years. So I get home and I get off the plane, and I'm telling you, like, virtually week one, I start interacting with the community, and there's young people telling me, this guy's got 15 or 16-year-old girls strung out on meth. He's pimping them out. This guy's molesting kids in this neighborhood over here. And it was so repeated that it just, it activated something in me that had already been alive anyway. And I literally just was compelled to go out. And it started one day with one of the names that one of the girls gave me. She was part of a youth music group. And she said the guy that was the leader of that music group was molesting some of the girls in that musical group. And I went and vetted him online, and it turned out he was convicted and registered. And why is this dude a music leader at a church with a bunch of kids alone at his house to begin with? That shit's a violation. That should never have happened, not even that layer. So that's what it was. And once I showed up at the right place at the right time, and had that interaction with one the first time, as a adult, I hate the word survivor of childhood abuse, but as an adult who went through that abuse as a child, it was so satisfying and so just cathartic to my spirit. And the best way I can explain it to you is, like, when you're a kid, you never win. You never win. Every time that asshole comes through the door with the 2x4, you lose. I lost every single interaction when I was a kid. And you walk away from one of these scenarios with one of these guys, and I promise you, I'm not losing. I'm not fucking losing. And I didn't. And it was so cathartic to win that it just felt amazing. And then fundamentally in my spirit, what I knew was, when I was a little ass kid, if some tattooed up badass would have kicked the door in and beat the brakes off the guy that was molesting my brother and I, man, I would have said, yeah, woo.
There's hope.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really what it is.
Yeah.
It would have changed my life. It would have actually changed my life, and it would have caused me to believe in things greater than me. All of that church stuff that they put me through, I would have actually believed that wholeheartedly, but it never happened. Not one time did it ever happen. I didn't even watch a member of their massive 1,000 member church community ever ask, "Are you all right, kid?" You know, I had visible bruises. I would some church services I would stand behind beside where my parents were sitting in the pew because I couldn't sit down because the dude had beaten me from my lower back all the way down to the backs of my knees with a 2x4. And when you see a little kid standing there at attention throughout the entire 2-hour church service while everyone else is sitting down, something's wrong. Something's clearly wrong. Nobody
One
ever even asked. Nobody
one thing
asked.
that stood out to me was you were talking one time about soccer.
Yeah.
Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And how you were, there was a time or a few times where you were struggling to keep up, and either running funny, limping, just not being able to keep up with the other kids. And what really stood out to me was that you said that were almost like penalized for that, where they were like, well, if you don't get your shit together, you're going to get kicked out of soccer. And
Yep.
nobody stopped to ask you, like, hey, are you feeling okay?
Yep.
Nobody knew that, your stepdad, pardon me, had just like evicted this type of abuse towards you. And here you are putting into this child's head that even though they're being abused, it's their fault that they can't keep up.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah. Yeah.
protection in
Yeah.
community.
Yeah. It's wild because as a little fat kid, I'm standing there in little soccer shorts. There's bruises visible on the backs of my legs. And I remember the soccer coach telling me, like, you better hustle your ass next time or you're going to sit on the bench and everything else. And at the time, when you're a little kid, what that does is it just reinforces in your subconscious that the abuse that's happening to you is not something that you should talk about. It's obviously not something that's wrong because nobody asks or says anything.
Yeah.
And so you learn to internalize that pain and that suffering and you start burying it because obviously that's what I'm supposed to do because nobody asks or says anything to me. Like I remember standing in the grocery store in line behind my mom and looking at the lady behind me and thinking to myself, I wonder if she's ever going to ask me. And nobody ever does. And so that's one of the things I encourage my community to do is I always say, if you see something, do something. All that see something, say something bullshit. If you see something, do something. Be aware, be vigilant, learn how to teach yourself how to look for the signs of child abuse. They are evident.
Yes.
They're not like subtle signs. They're very evident.
Yeah.
Bruises and marks on a child's body, a bedwetter, a kid that's never allowed to go over to anybody's house ever and spend the night. I mean, it's obvious when a kid is being abused. And then it's very simple. You don't have to run over and assault the parents. Ask the child, are you all right, bro? Is
Yeah.
everything cool? You should tell me. It's super simple. And people just because we're so isolationist, and that's something else that I learned since I've been released post COVID. Everybody is so isolated in their little houses and their little spots.
Hmm.
Um, that's really the beauty and the power that I see in what we're doing right now is because this is really the way. This is the modern way to establish a community and to get into people's living rooms right here,
Yeah.
because people don't socialize much anymore.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that I resonate with you about on a personal level. But I think the biggest thing is just how you talk about that, the community and recognizing those signs. And we really are like I'm talking like the last 5 years, just coming out of a time where the biggest thing was like, if something's going on within a family, like nobody reported it, you just minded your own business. And I
Yep.
look back to myself as a kid that was like, I'm not an isolationist. Like I was isolated intentionally because
Yep.
like that's what abusers do. That's how they can
Yep.
abuse you. But
Yep.
there is no freaking way in hell that my neighbors, I lived in the same house for years, there's no way those neighbors didn't know that there was a child being abused in that house. When I first went
Exactly.
to school in grade 6, there's no freaking way that the teachers and the principals didn't know. I was wearing the same clothes to school every day. I smelled like human feces because I was always locked in my room, not allowed to use my bathroom. I was like a fucking child. Like, this is where I was coming from. Always messy, knots in my hair from where my mom would like grab me and throw me. There were so many signs, but that was a time where if you see something, you don't say anything. You just mind your business. The family's going to deal with it. It was like that with child abuse. It was like that with domestic violence. So creating a society, like, I didn't even know that there was anybody that would protect me. I didn't even know what the word abuse was. I didn't know that I was being abused. I just
Yep.
knew that what was happening to me wasn't normal. And one thing that I stress to even my own children, where like, and I'm not an abuser, but I tell my daughter, like, if you ever feel like I'm actually like abusing you, like fly off the handle, start hitting you, anybody else in your life, I let her know there are people out there that will protect you. You can
Yep.
call them, but don't ever abuse it because
Yep.
that'll affect you more. Don't be
Yeah.
calling social services on mom when nothing's
Yeah.
happening to you. You're going to get like
Yeah. It's
punished.
true.
But
Well, and that's one of the simple changes that needs to take place. So, like, if you think about it, when I was a kid, there's 911. I don't know what you guys have in Canada. In the US, it's
911.
911. You call the police. Well,
Yeah.
one of the things you have to realize, everyone should realize, is that we've been trained due to the emergency response system that if something bad happens or is happening, call a stranger. That's what we're trained to do. If the house is on fire, call the fire department. If somebody's hurt, call the police. You're trained from the time you're born nowadays. Call a stranger, call a stranger, call a stranger. And actually, what that's done a couple of generations later is it's taught us all subconsciously to not contribute or help or get involved because we're taught call 911, call a stranger.
Great point.
And the reality is,
Fantastic point.
yeah, and the reality is if you have neighbors and you're in a neighborhood and the house is on fire, sure, call the fire department, but grab a hose, get a bucket,
Yeah.
contribute, help out.
Yeah.
And so I tell people all the time that it's just one of the skills that you have to have in your tool basket as you go about your daily life. I know you're busy. I don't recommend anyone go out and act like a vigilante and start assaulting, but I do recommend that you start being vigilant to your surroundings. When you go to the store and there's a little kid running around, just be
Keep an eye on
vigilant.
that kid.
Just be
Yeah.
vigilant. Yeah, you
Yeah.
might save a kid's life. And the thing is, saving one kid's life, and that's another thing for me. That's why I cannot say I regret any of the decisions I've made because the fact that I was able to be there for just one, worth it, worth it. Because standing in the courtroom the day I got sentenced, honestly, inwardly, I was thinking to myself, the judge is giving me a 23-year sentence. And yes, that sort of settled on me like a very heavy weight. And I thought the rest of my life would be gone. But at the same time, I sort of chuckled to myself inside and I thought, this dude, he really doesn't know, does he? He doesn't get it. I got my life sentence when I was 8 years old. When I started being molested, that's when I received my life sentence. I'm already in prison. I'm in a spiritual prison. I'm in an emotional prison. My life was literally taken from me when I was a little kid. That's what happens. And so to have another adult later on in life say, hey, we're taking your life from you, I was like, bet, because it's already gone. So, okay. And
Yeah.
people don't realize that just saving one kid, it's worth it, man. It's worth it.
One thing that stood out to me is when you left. Well, we'll go into the actual, like the nitty gritty of it here in a minute. But what stuck out to me about you was you said something in an interview a couple years ago, and you were talking about when you left home and kind of had to like fend for yourself and got into those like petty crimes and stealing and that type of stuff. You said that being known as like a liar or like a thief, like not a liar, but like an untrustworthy person, like a thief, you felt that that was suiting because it matched how you felt on the inside, like your worth. And I think that
Yes.
that was extremely profound for me, because I think that's the root of why a lot of us who are abused as kids, a lot of us end up either repetitively or at least another one time end up getting abused again later in life. And the reason why, for some of us, not that it's any of our faults, but we've internalized this sense of self-worth that isn't very high. So some of us are more willing to excuse shitty behavior or maybe red flags or like the abuse that we're given, because we're taught about love from our parents. So if you're not loved as a kid, how the fuck do you know how you're supposed to be loved, what that looks like? So I felt like that was extremely profound. And, from like human being to human being, I hope that by the majority of the world wrapping their arms around you, so to speak, and relating and sharing in that trauma with you, I hope that that's alleviated some of those feelings of worthlessness. Although I know it doesn't quite go away, because I'm somebody myself where people will be like, you've changed my life or you've saved my life. And to me, it feels fake, because on the inside, I'm just as depressed and sad and suicidal sometimes as you. So it's like, it's hard, but I hope that it's given you a little bit more purpose and self-worth, hopefully.
So when you're a little child and you're growing up and you've been beaten like a fucking farm animal for years and years and years, what's being driven into your subconscious is that you are worthless like an animal. You have no value. You're not worth anything. And then you add the sexual molestation on top of that as a complication to that. What happens is you internalize all of that and you don't even know it. It's not even conscious, but
No.
you start making decisions that reflect what you've been shown. So, of course, I don't brush my teeth and take care of myself. Of course, I don't care about my credit score. Of course, I'm out here stealing people's stuff and living for today. Of course, I am, because I'm worthless. And I know I'm worthless because for a decade, I've been treated and shown that I am worthless. And none of that is conscious, that is all subconscious. And so then to further compound that mindset, which is very fragmented and flawed, you now start encountering the judicial system and you start encountering people involved with the law who tell you you're bad, you're a liar, you're a thief, you're a scammer, you're a piece of shit. And so now you start hearing that from people in other positions of authority, and it just reinforces this negative self image and lack of self worth. And it adds up to this big ball, which basically means now you do not want people like that roaming around the community and being a part of society. I assure you, you don't. A person that has nothing to lose and no self worth at all whatsoever is a detriment to society and is a dangerous person. I can assure you of that.
Absolutely.
So you're absolutely right. Interestingly, about the prison experience and getting out of prison, I saw and experienced so many powerful, terrible, profound things along the way: stabbings, riots, sexual assault, all types of horrible things I saw. But there is nothing that kicked my ass more in a more profound way than getting out and experiencing love and kindness. Um, sorry, for the first time. It literally blew me away. And I'm not even kidding you. I was so devastated by the kindness from another human being that I still have a hard time accepting it now in person. It's devastating because I hadn't had it in my lifetime ever, and I didn't know how to accept it. Um, so yeah, that shit's real.
I can relate to that. Well, I know when you're used to like nothing but chaos, when you get the good stuff, it can feel like almost unnatural. You're like expecting the chaos, but allowing yourself to like, I think, feel through that is incredibly important, and also accept it. Like you're not out here rejecting it. You're also accepting it. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I remember JD laughing and telling me like, "Bro, if you cry one more time, like we're going to have to cut this off, bro. I can't handle it." Because I literally would have tears running down my face because these people were just genuine and sincere and kind to me, and it felt so foreign to me that it literally kicked my ass. I didn't know how to handle it. Like I'd be on the phone telling them thank you, and I would just start crying because I'm not used to that.
Yeah, it's like what you told me about getting engaged, which like really stuck to me. You're now being showed the unconditional like love and acceptance that you should have like gotten as a kid but didn't. So it's almost I can 1000% like relate to you 100% where it feels unnatural, but it's something you're just like so grateful for. I said people just take it for granted a lot, having parents or even siblings, or like I'm adopted. My children were the first people I ever met that shared the same blood as me. So
Yeah,
to go lacking with these things that people often take for granted, people don't understand like the type of confliction and just healing even that just a little bit of kindness can do. It's like, wow, what do you mean? Like, I deserve this? I deserve this
yeah,
kindness? Like, what?
yeah. That's what it does. It gives you a little tiny piece of your soul back, one little piece at a time. And a lot of times that's what's in my mind. Another thing that I've learned since I've been out is that social media is the place where there's a bunch of very selfish, ignorant, negative people, and they like to just spew foul shit
Oh,
for no reason. And the thing that's really interesting to me about that is it's a sad commentary on their life, because if you're that fortunate in your world where you can run around and just spew foul shit to strangers that you don't know, then you must be summarily blessed and you must have had a much greater existence than I will ever have, because I just don't have it in me. And apparently, other people out here in this world do, because I assure you, if you've lived alone, isolated on an island like I have for the majority of your life, when you come out and you start experiencing real love and real kindness from people, um, you don't take it for granted, and it's not something that I take lightly, not at all.
yeah.
And so it's like, recently my mom died, and I didn't have a good relationship with her at all. She was a terrible person. But I'm telling you, the outpouring of love from my own community was so amazing for me to experience, because what I was used to in my life is, well, suck it up, dude. Suck it up, homie. Get your shit together, bro. We don't have time for that shit. Suck it up. That's what I was used to. And to have people take the time, because it takes time to log into a thing and write a genuine 2 or 3 paragraph, very kind, meaningful, encouraging thing. It really touched my heart and it really blessed me. And honestly, like I say, it gave me a little piece of my soul back, because for most of my life, I was convinced that I was completely alone. It's like I was running a race all by myself and I was convinced I was alone.
I still
Um,
feel like that.
yeah, well,
I
in the
haven't gotten
last
rid of
8
that
weeks, yeah. Well, you're not alone now. You got a brother now. So,
yet.
but
Appreciate
the
that.
last 8 weeks has really shown me, and the last 10 years has shown me that I'm not alone. Um, so that's another really powerful and cool thing to experience.
I want to take you back to like, um, back to, what got us all here, the reason why you're here, why people know you. And I want to understand that a little bit more too. I think I also want to stress to people there's a lot of different rhetorics in the media. I just saw some guy, some prison inmate that has a podcast, and he posted some opinion of you like 2 months ago. And he started off by saying, like, you're awesome. I really appreciate what you did. However, I understand the other side with, people saying, oh, these guys did their time and, you can't take stuff into your own hands and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of different opinions. So I want to take it back to like the actual people. You're frozen. I'll give you a second. Oh, there you go. I want to take it back to like the actual events, because I don't think sometimes people understand how disgusting these individuals that you went after is. Not that there's like a ranking or a bar of like okay pedophilia and bad pedophilia, but for some reason in people's brain, they seem to be confusing it and I don't know what's wrong with people. So I just want to get into, who these people were. So the first, I'm going to call them like a target. I'm not going to call them victims because I don't think they're victims at all. Your first target, I'm not going to say their whole name because I just don't think that they deserve that. But the first guy's name is Charles, and he was accused of raping his own daughter. And in that rape, there was a child produced. And at the time when you were researching him and kind of scouting him out, he was currently, that child was currently in his care. Is that correct? Can you tell me about kind of that first time and what led you up to going over to the house? How did you do it? Would you mind just, sharing that experience?
Yeah, and I have to be extremely careful what I do and do not say because I'm under heavy restrictions, just so you know. But what I will tell you is
Totally.
this person had raped his daughter, and he was taking care of his daughter with his daughter at the time, which again, and he was convicted of raping his daughter, which is a violation of all of the protocols for his supervision. I don't know how that played out. But that is true. And it just disgusted me so much. And I don't think people understand. I've gotten 1,000, a million letters or comments or whatever from people that say, I don't advocate violence, but I don't think violence is right. But, and the thing I want to point out is that the only violence in this entire narrative that anyone should ever have their mind on is, okay, I went and beat somebody up one time, but I'm going to tell you right now, I got beaten with a 2x4 1,000 times. Can you imagine if I would have taken a 2x4 and gone and beat 1,000 dudes? I would be spending the rest of my life in prison. So you guys tell me how the guy that beat me with a 2x4 got a suspended prison sentence. Okay. And we all know the sentence that I got. So these people do not have a compulsion that is natural to a human being. I will just say that. Um, and the thing is, find me a therapist or a counselor that can assure you that it is counselable, that it can be therapied away, that compulsion. There isn't one. There's not a therapist on the face of the earth. So when you have a person out there who is touching, holding, handling the baby, a product of a sexual assault, alone in his house, that is just how foul and how dark and how evil this world really is. It's real. And so that particular day I went there and it was surreal. It was absolutely surreal. Like a scene out of a movie. It's summertime. It's early evening. That neighborhood should be chock full of people running around everywhere. And it was dead quiet like a movie set. It was the most surreal experience. And I pulled up and walked up to the house, pounded on the front door. Nobody answered. And I went around the back and it had one of those gates. It was a fenced backyard where you can reach over the top and hit the latch. And I did, and I let myself into the backyard. It was a duplex. And I walked around to the back of his side of the building and I looked down in the master bedroom. And this dude is sitting in the middle of his room in his chair, sitting there. And I knocked on the window, boom, 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 boom. And he looks over and I tell him, go answer your front door, homeboy. And he points at himself and goes, me? And I said, yeah, you go open your door. And so I walked around the front and he opened the door. And I shit you not, I walked right past him into his house. And I told him, come on, man, come on. And just like a puppy, he followed me into his
What an
bedroom,
idiot.
into his master bedroom.
I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that, but what a
Yeah.
fucking stupid thing to do.
Yeah. And again, I have to be really careful what I say or how I talk right now, but I will tell you this. I systematically dismantled his face by hand in that experience. And one of the things I like to do back at the time is I'll tell you this: you can go slap somebody up, and that's a lesson that's going to last for a minute, but there's a reason why you tax people. And one of my favorite things to do was to tax them and then take money or goods and bring them to single moms or people that needed it or whatever. That particular day was kind of interesting because I remember this dude had like 15 credit cards, and I remember him laying face down on his bed crying, and me holding all of his credit cards in an array telling him which one of these credit cards and how much do you authorize a single mom to charge on these things. And he's like, oh, you can take the American Express, $500. And I told him, $500? That's it. He's like, $1,000, $1,000. So it was kind of hilarious. But I walked out of there with like 2 of his credit cards. And I drove over to a trailer park that I knew a bunch of broke families were living in. And I'm not even kidding you. I rolled up on a single mom with some dusty, dirty little kids in a trailer. And I told her, guess what? Here's a credit card. And the dude says you can put $1,000 on it. Go ahead. Shopping spree. And that's what she did. Took off with it on a shopping spree. But I suppose that it is a change your life moment for somebody like that when somebody like me shows up and does that. Because in this world, and again, I want to be very careful and clear. I'm not advocating that anyone follow in my footsteps or
Yeah, we'll
start
touch on
vigilant.
that after too,
Yeah.
for sure.
But what I will say is in this world, when you're a small child and you check the locks on your doors and you're scared to death that somebody's going to come in and touch you, it's probably fair that there be an equal and opposite fear for the predators of those kids. That something bad is going to happen if they continue to act that way towards children. I think that is fair and reasonable. It seems natural. And now I'm not in a place in my life. Certainly, I've had to advance my practice to the place where I uplift kids and things like that. But at the time, in my mindset at the time, it seemed very linear and very natural. Of course, I was doing that.
Somebody in the comments, I don't usually read comments. Oh, is Jax Delay. Is that JD's wifey? Jax Delay?
Yes, Jax. Yeah.
Oh, hi Jax. I've been watching you on social media. You're such a sweetheart. This comment really captured my attention. She said, rabid animals are sick and it isn't a choice, yet they're still euthanized for public safety. Tell it. Tell it, girl.
Yeah.
That's a truer statement has never been said. So how long after did you go after your second target? So your second target, who I'm just going to leave them nameless, actually. I don't really think they deserve to be named. This guy was a known filmer of child pornography. Just real quick, the first guy, do you know what he got sentenced? Oh, and really quick again, sorry, just 2 seconds. For the people sending in super chats, thank you so much for the super chats. If you want to ask Jason a question directly, and it'll be read out after our interview here, but still while it's live, still during the live stream, if you want to ask him a question and you want to send a super chat, do those at once so that your question can be like read after. That's kind of cool. So thank you to everybody who's sending super chats. If you want to ask a question with those super chats, it'll be read in the live. But yeah, to go back, do you know what the first guy got charged for? Like, how long did he spend in jail, if any, for doing that to his daughter and producing an incest baby out of it?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I will tell you this: of the 3 I was convicted of, their total sentence, all 3 combined, was 6 years 9 months. If I'm not mistaken, I think that dude did less than 2 years in prison for that conviction. Which is another interesting point that needs to be made, which is, what's really crazy is during my time in prison, I sought out actively PTSD therapy, childhood trauma therapy, things of that nature. And the prison systematically denied or blocked my access to any of that therapy the entire time I was in prison. Matter of fact, there was a year or two when I was in the maximum security joint where I was doing teletherapy that I paid for myself, and security was actively blocking the therapist's phone number every single week. And she would have to get a new Google number and get it to me every week because they would block it, because you are not allowed to have PTSD therapy while you're in prison. That's real. However, if you are a child predator, you can walk down the tier and get your little 18-month program and get bounced
Oh,
out of the
fuck
prison
off.
immediately. Real talk.
Fuck
That's real
off.
talk.
Are you
Yep.
serious?
Yep, that's 100% real. And it's, again, this is the system by design. It is by design. Matter of fact, I have very distinct memories of sitting in class number 39. I took every single class that the prison ever offered and more. And I remember sitting in my classroom, listening to the dudes, the predators in the room next to me, read their little letters. And thank goodness I've gone through this class, because I have now learned to not do this or not do that. And they were about to let them back out into society.
Nobody ever had to teach me not to touch little kids. Thank God I learned.
No one needs to.
Off.
Yeah, and no one needs to. It is very natural and normal to already know that sort of thing is not appropriate. However, this is the world we live in. And again, I have to be extremely careful how I communicate. But I will tell you, combined between the three of them, 6 years, 9 months. That was their total prison time for their crimes against children. And so it's just like, clearly this is an uneven, equation that we're involved in. That much is known. And one of the things I did, because I'm so bright, I'm stupid, is I decided to tell the prosecutor via the front page of the news that I'd be happy to plead guilty to anything as long as my sentence was exactly the same as all of the predators combined. And I don't recommend you ever communicate to prosecutors in that manner if you're in jail, because they didn't like it at all. It really irritated them deeply that I had the audacity to do that. But to me, once again, simple is genius to me. And I thought, well, that's fair.
Fair.
I'll serve all their prison times. That's totally fair, right?
I mean, it's not fair, but if you want to look at it at that scope, like, I guess, like, it's right. Fair. What would have been fair is if they did more time, but...
The other thing is, I'm a reasonable man, and I knew very early on that I had broken the law. I didn't think I should get away scot-free and serve 0 jail time. I just thought the jail time should be equal in nature to the crime. So in my mind at the time, I thought it was pretty uneven, So the next guy was he was a filmmaker, and I will tell you this: they are some of the most vile and disgusting humans on this planet, because they organize the shoots, they shoot the film, they distribute the film.
And just to clarify, the films we're talking about is child pornography, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. They have to source children and people that abuse children to be in the films. They're extremely connected to that vile community, very, very much so. And that was a person that served 1 year and 3 months or something like that for his conviction. Very, very short period of time. And it's not my place. One of the lessons I was taught very, very directly is it's not my role in this life to decide people's prison sentences or to mete out justice on behalf of the judicial system. That's one of the things that I was taught in a very direct manner with my recent sentence and the time since then. However, at the time, in my mind, I thought, well, if these guys aren't taking care of it and they're not going to be a detriment to people that are abusing kids, then that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take it upon myself to be that and do that. And so that was sort of...
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I feel like it's a Canadian thing. We have a bad, like, the interrupting thing. I'm working on it. I'm really working on it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's not, just so you know, in my world, it's not interrupting, it's interjecting. And I do it all the time. I'm horrible.
I'm awful for it. So your second target, how did you become familiar? How did you find all of these people?
You know, what's funny is I think one of them was solely, I saw it on the registry. I think one of them was that from the community. And I actually went to the registry because I'm not a person that's going to run off half cocked just based on chatter or whatever. So I would go to sort of vet the story and see if this was a person maybe that was on there or not. And both of them were. And so someone had told me that this dude was recruiting young people for filming. And I sort of didn't believe it because it seemed so outlandish that a person would just be out there like that asking young kids 12, 13 years old if you want to get paid. He was giving them like $200 or $500 or something to come be in a film. I didn't believe that someone would really be that blatant. And it was the case that was happening. And so that's literally how I ended up there. Um, and just one of those things, man. Found myself at his front door that particular night. Prior to going there, I'd stopped off at somebody's house, and it was a room full of people, guys and girls, tatted up, slung down, prison-looking dudes. And I was like, "Hey, I got to go handle this. If any of you guys want to come with me." And it's kind of funny because all the dudes were like, "No, no, hell no, absolutely not. We're not going to do that." And it was the girls in the room who had suffered abuse when they were young. One of them in particular, like her uncles had burned the bottoms of her feet with cigars. She didn't want to perform whatever sexual acts that they were asking her to do. Just horrible. And so I ended up with two girls that went with me that night. And I pounded and knocked on the front door for a while. The dude didn't want to answer his door, and I was just jimmying the front door to get in when he got out of bed and came and answered the door. And I did what I did, pushed him into the house, put him in a chair, gave him a pretty effective sermon about molesting kids in my state, administered some corporal punishment to seal the message. And, it was interesting that night because I told the girls, like, look, you can take anything you want, man. Anything this dude has, it belongs to you. That's your shit. Um, and I think that one right there, he happened to have a title to a truck that he had. And I told him, "You want to donate this truck to a single mom that needs it, right?" And he did kindly, which was nice. And I remember bringing that vehicle and those keys to this mom. It was funny because she was living with her mom in a dusty little trailer in a trailer park. And her mom let me in. And I think she was taking a nap in her bedroom. And I remember going in the room and swinging the keys over her face and telling her, "Hey, wake up. Guess what? Somebody just gave you a car." And that was kind of a good feeling. That was a cool moment. But yeah.
Can I ask you, and not that I disagree with your decisions, but logically I have to ask you, when taking these things like cars and cards from these pedophiles and giving them to other people, were you at all concerned that they may end up being held responsible? Did you let them know, if any reason, if law enforcement comes to you, did you give them any sort of what was that
Yeah.
conversation like? Because you're a very
Well,
thoughtful
so
person. I can't imagine
yeah,
you would set
yeah,
somebody up to be
absolutely
charged
not.
with something.
So I mean, yeah, and you have to realize these are families that are involved with the life. So this isn't like it's not like I was going to an upper crust neighborhood, people that don't
Right.
know the life,
Okay. Okay.
which is another thing that factors into this whole situation, which is if you're raised in a criminal lifestyle, we don't talk about it for any reason. And that's
Right.
one of the things that JD and I have done and spoken loudly together, which is having to re-educate the criminal community. It is not ratting when you call the police on a child abuser. It is not ratting if you cooperate with the police against someone that is harming children. It is not ratting. You are not a rat. That is
Yeah.
an exclusion from the code. And that's not something that I was ever taught. None of the OGs ever said that to me. Everybody
Mm,
said, telling is telling, right? Telling is telling, right?
that's
And the
interesting.
thing is, what actually ends up happening is not only does nobody call the police, but nobody gets off their ass to do anything either.
Nope.
That's what happened. And
Yep.
so for myself, like in that particular instance, we knew somebody that ran a shop. And so she was able to take that vehicle to the shop and trade it and get another car and have it to drive. When it came to the credit cards, I was very specific with the people that donated those credit cards. And I would tell them, you're authorizing me to charge how much on which card. I was very specific. Um, and of course the family or the person that I gave them to, if it was something like that, I told them, like, check this out, this is where it came from, so do your thing, but be careful. Type 5.
Okay. I love how you say the people who donated them. I get such a kick out of that. Excuse me. um so the third guy is, oh, actually, I had another question. Something that's very popular in the media that went around, it's got just on one channel, it has 3.3 million views. And part of that video included, which, like, our interview, I'm going to put into a long form video. So for those that like want to see that, I'm going to have that ready tomorrow because I'm like a hard worker like that. But I'm going to include this audio. But there's audio of when the police pulled you over after you had just fled your third target's house, which we'll get into that in a minute. In this audio, you had mentioned something about a handler, and your co-accused, one of the girls who went with you, I believe it was during the second visit to these individuals' houses, had stated that there was somebody else involved, which I obviously do not want you to name, but that there was somebody else involved who was helping you with this information. And when you had been arrested, you had used the term handler, which allowed people to make the assumption that you were maybe having delusions of grandeur, maybe you were dealing with schizophrenia, maybe you were in a meth-induced psychosis. Can you clarify for people what you meant? Can you just clarify, because
Yeah.
it's
So
a big misconception in the media. People aren't
yeah.
quite sure
So
what to make of that.
yeah, I'm gonna speak in generalized terms that people can palate
Mhm.
easily. And what I will tell you is, in this country, there are large clandestine families that have old family traditions, and a lot of them involve commoditizing children. Children are a commodity. Certain types of families, young girls, for instance, educated and trained to be breeders, literally like breeding stock. They are trained and taught how to be a housewoman, and they teach them skills on how to please the husband, and they breed them with people of certain nationalities or races because they want a pure bloodline and things like that. It's very, very real in this country. And any time that I encroach on that subject matter and speak in that manner, people get very sucked up and they're very quick to jump to that sort of conclusion, like, oh, well, he must be high, he must be spun out, it must be a delusion. So certainly at that time there was a specific person who was a part of one of those families, and she was indignant after years of their traditions, their sick traditions involving children and kids. um, and she was one of the people that was giving me information or names, and these are men that are in positions of power and authority in this world within their family tradition, and some of them outside of their family tradition, they're in a position of authority or power. um, and you know what? I give her nothing but credit for having the courage to even communicate like that with me, or reveal things like that from their inner workings of that sort of tribal system, because that's a very, very rare thing. And you have to realize, well, like, whether it's a biker culture, a biker community culture, or whether it's some other sort of Aryan culture or any sort of thing like that, keep in mind there are traditions in this country that involve very, very sick and evil things related to kids, and they're very, very real, and they certainly do exist. And so, I personally, one of my sources was a woman that was raised within that tradition, and she had rank and insight into other members in that tradition. And I definitely went to her a few times to get information or names or things like that. And so, when the cops are grilling me and they're asking me, I just referred to her as a handler because I didn't want to reveal things that I shouldn't, um, outside of, a certain structure. I didn't want to say things to them that they didn't need to know. So I sort of skirted it as best I could. And also in conjunction with that, during those years of my life, I was getting high. I did get high.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't like to qualify or quantify drug use because all of it is negative and all of it leads to one place. But I will tell you that I was a person during those years. I never stayed up 2 or 3 nights in a row. I never used a needle or injected drugs in my life. I never did anything like that. So I'm not saying any of my drug use was okay. And I'm not trying to qualify drug use at that time. But no, I was never in any sort of a psychosis or anything like that. Had my wits about me. I was just trying to skirt things that you don't talk to police about while letting them know that I wasn't just running amok, randomly picking people.
Okay. Yeah, and one thing that I can say from watching your interview is that you did a very impressive job, because cops are sort of, and investigators are quite trained in getting information from people without them feeling like they're giving the information. And you picked up on it every time. I thought that that was impressive, but also one thing that I actually explained to somebody in my personal life was that, I think a lot of people know, maybe they don't know, but like I used to smoke meth. I was a binge user for about 2.5 years. I started at the age of 16 and I got clean probably about 18, 19. And one thing about meth, I don't know anything about needles. I've never done needles, but one thing about smoking meth in particular, um, it doesn't give you, it doesn't like make you, it's not like psilocybin LSD where it, makes you do these crazy things. You still have your own consciousness. The way that I would describe it is, if anything, it just kind of takes away a little bit of the emotion that's attached to certain things. But by
Yeah,
no means are you going to, smoke meth and go commit a massacre because you were on meth. I just don't personally believe that as a
yeah,
user. I don't really think, not a current one, as an ex user.
yeah.
I never
Well,
personally.
yeah. Well,
Um,
what people don't realize that are outside of the culture or haven't studied human biology, even cursory study of human biology, will tell you sleep deprivation is what induces psychosis.
yes,
It's getting sleep at night or not
right,
that induces the psychosis. So go ahead, you can get on any substance, meth or any other one, and don't sleep for 4 or 5 consecutive nights, and you will start falling into a psychosis.
for sure.
Um, so what I will also
Oh,
tell you
definitely.
though is that
Yeah.
methamphetamine affects individuals in one of two ways generally. It will give you paranoid delusions or delusions of grandeur. The pendulum will swing the other way. Certainly, as my life is evidence of, mine swung to the grandeur side, and by that, what I mean is, I was one of those which was, we can't be arrested. The police know we're on a righteous cause. They're not going to touch us. We're going to be good. And
Mm.
I was operating like, certainly I'm good. They're not gonna come and arrest me because they got to know what I'm doing is righteous.
But
Um,
do you think that the meth made you, like, do you think you would have done that if you weren't on drugs? Because my point, and
for
maybe
sure.
I'm wrong. For me, I was never a tweaker. I was what I
Yeah.
called myself a responsible user. So I cut myself
Right.
off a certain time so I could eat, so I could sleep. So I never got paranoid. I never started picking. I was not like, nobody knew. Like, nobody in my life knew. So
Yeah.
Do you, maybe it's a different experience for other people. Do you think you would have done that sober?
So I would have done other states completely sober a number of times. Do I think that methamphetamine affected my judgment and decisions I was making and not being concerned for any consequences and things like that? Absolutely. But that's something else that I want to point out here, which is a really important point. Keep in mind that I went face up, no mask, no gun to every single place that I went. And that is not a person. That is not a person that is in the middle of a psychosis. Because believe me, ski masks are $1.99 at any ski store anywhere.
I literally said that earlier. I was like, meth heads are the first ones to like take the duct tape and like get all the hair off of them. And
yeah. Straight up. Trust me, I was part of a convict already, a criminal community. I could have got a firearm anytime, any day, anywhere. I specifically went the way I went because this was all tied to my childhood, and I wanted them to see my face, and I wanted to see their face, and I wanted to stand there toe to toe, man to man, put your fucking hands up, and I wanted to do this the way it was done to me. That's what I wanted to do. That's the reason why. And that's not a person, that's off lost in the sauce. And then the other thing too, I wanted to just touch on extremely briefly because I'm glancing at your comments. And every single time I wear a pendant that has a compass and a square on it, you're going to get an ocean of comments that talk about Freemasons and sacrificing babies and everything else. So I want to tell you, just so the whole community here in the comments here can sit down and get off your Google rabbit holes. I spent 6 years in a maximum security joint, and I am a spiritualist, and I was the officer in a clandestine Masonic lodge for 7 years, and I worked through all 3 degrees, and we studied that tradition, and it's a men's fraternity, and it's designed to make good men better. I have no idea what creepy dudes out in this world do with their fraternal organizations or their version of it. I'm not a part of that. But what I will tell you is I was extremely fortunate and grateful to be a part of one. And it taught me many things. And living on the square means having morals or values. And so just so all you guys in the comments know, again, sit the fuck down with your weirdo comments, recognize who the fuck you're talking to, and let's move on to something else because that shit's boring.
Okay, I wanted to touch on one comment here that caught my eye. This person was asked about methamphetamines. They said, did it affect creativity or make it better? I get a kind of like a vibe where maybe this person could be maybe considering doing it. I don't know. If you're asking about creativity, it's kind of giving that vibe.
Yeah.
Please, for the love of anything holy, meth is the last drug that you ever want to touch. It absolutely destroys your life. And without even realizing it, you will just like that, you're addicted. It does not help with creativity. It can make you paranoid. It can make you just a straight up tweaker where you're checking your blinds, thinking that your neighbors are watching you. Methamphetamines is not a drug that you want to take for creativity. If you want to take something for creativity, may I suggest smoking 2 puffs of a doobie, microdosing on mushrooms. These are much healthier ways if you're going to utilize drugs. I do not suggest to anybody to do drugs, but if that's what you're seeking, please seek a more organic, such as marijuana, edibles, psilocybin, methamphetamines, any type of amphetamine, whether that's meth, cocaine. That is not the route you want to go. I just really want to stress that. That person sounded way too curious.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, if I was going to say all of that in my words, what I will tell you is this: if you're listening right now, I have never met a single OG methamphetamine user, not one, started using meth because it's benefited my life in the following ways. Not one human being on the face of the earth ever has stepped away from that practice and had that to say about it. So if you're thinking properly, you should understand if there isn't a single person on the face of the earth that's grateful they started using meth, don't
do it.
Yeah. So, bottom line.
The night that you sought out Your third target, again, I just don't want to use the word. I saw a few people in here asking why I was using the word target and not victim. I just don't think these people are victims. So I'm just going to call them targets because they're not a victim of anything but their own choices. Um, that night, when you decided to go over there, had you been using?
Um, in the days, in the days prior to that, I'll just say yes. You know what I mean? Because that using small amounts of drugs was a part of my lifestyle at that time.
Okay.
So was I high that night? Probably. Um, I certainly don't want to sit here and say no and seem like I'm being deceitful, but that was a period of time in my life when I was getting high for sure.
Okay. So can you tell me about that last night, because your last target was obviously where it kind of came crashing down, so to speak, where you got caught, where you were arrested, and I believe where you left his house kind of wondering if your life was like over, if you had taken a completely different route, and if you would go to prison forever. Can you tell us a bit about that night?
Interesting thing that people is that particular night, this dude was a millionaire and owned a really, really nice home on a lake. And
Oh.
it was at the end of a dead end road. Well, what I didn't know is that he had converted a portion of his home into a bed and breakfast. And so that night I pulled up outside, and at the time it was really cool. The Hmongs, which are, I think they're Cantonese nationality, they're actually a massive crime family, one of the largest in the world. And they had gifted me a really badass pit bull. I named him Amanos. And Amanos,
What a
my
sick
dog,
name.
used to look. Yeah, it's the name for an old demon, and that dog was definitely an old demon. He would sit in the seat next to me, and that motherfucker would sit there like, and I would tell him, "Are you ready to go, Amanos? Are you ready to go?" He was ready to go, trust me. And I would let him out of the car, and he would either circle the outside of the house while I was inside in case one of them ran for it, or he would come inside with me and he'd be chomping on their ankle or whatever while I was giving him the spiel. So I pull up outside with Amanos and I start knocking on the front door and all the windows. And I can see he's got the light on in the master bedroom, and I'm pounding on the window. Come answer the door, homeboy. I need to talk to you. Come answer the door. And this dude, probably an hour, pounding and pounding and pounding.
Say that one more time because you cut out. Sorry, say that one more time.
There is actually a specific of abuser that has the compulsion to put things, objects, body parts inside of babies. And he is one of those. And this is a particular variety of monster that walks this face of the earth. And there's enough of them where psychologists have actually created a different designation. It is not called pedophile, it is called something else for this sort of individual. And he was one of those. So he didn't answer his door. He wouldn't answer his door. And I just happened to remember that I had my tools in my car. And so I went to the car and I grabbed a hammer and I smashed out the side light on his house and let myself into his house. And as I walked through the living room, I could see a big circle of musical instruments in his living room because this was the guy who was the youth music leader for a church. And you tell me how someone with this sort of convictions gets himself in a position of authority over children. the door. This dude had swung his master bedroom door shut and was sort of barricading it. So I kicked the door in and pushed my way in. And I think I had a small backpack, and I set my backpack down on the floor in between us. And I'm telling him, "Get on the fucking ground, sit down." And the dude wouldn't sit down; he wouldn't comply. And another thing that's interesting about that is always make sure you check your height and weight. Um, just always make sure you do that, because this dude was like 6'4", maybe 300 and some odd pounds. I don't know. So I was like
Oh my
telling him to
God.
comply, and he didn't want to comply. And he asked me, like, "What are you doing here? Why are you here?"
Oh, wait, hold on. People are
Yeah,
having a
I
hard
see.
time hearing you just because of your audio. Just give me a second. Let me make sure. Your Wi-Fi connection right now is struggle busing.
Is it me?
Yeah, but
Is
just
it
get,
me?
yeah,
Look, I'm gonna move. I'm gonna move over to the studio.
okay.
I'm gonna move us.
For everybody watching, can you please tell us at what point you stopped hearing him properly, just so we can go back? The feds are blocking his signal. I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, that may not entirely be untrue.
My moderator is dropping Jason's Patreon here in the chat. So if you guys want to support Jason, you want to support him monthly, continue in his story. I know he's constantly uploading onto Patreon. Please consider subscribing to his Patreon. Okay, well, you have to give me a specific. People are saying 3 minutes ago. I need what part? What part was the last part you guys heard?
She says, "We heard when his dog would sit in the passenger seat."
Okay.
That's what I thought.
Let's let the internet just kind of connect more for a second.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna take this second to vape. Sorry guys, I'm quitting smoking.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Break time.
Okay, it seems a little more stable. Okay, so it kind of cut out
People
when you were
said
at
when
the
he
door.
rolled up with his dog. Yeah.
Okay, go
So
ahead.
I realized I had a hammer.
Hold on. Hold on. I'm so sorry because I don't want you to go on longer. The internet is still just reconnecting for you. Sorry. So sorry. Just give it a second.
Side, because this is where I full-time record right now. I should have hella super signal.
Well, I've got it open.
Record right now. I should have hella super signal.
Well, okay, so chat, is his video lagging? Can you hear his audio? If the video is lagging, like that's fine. We'll correct it on my end when I upload this. But can you guys still hear his audio? Because I can still hear the audio just fine. Everyone's like, it's the feds. Video and audio is lagging. Okay, no, okay, both. No, we can't restart the stream, so we'll just give it a second. I can kind of tell by the visuals, it's like starting to get better.
It's so literally where 100% of my content gets recorded, both rooms.
Well, and it was fine the whole time. Do you want to, you know how you swipe up to close your other apps? Do you want to close your other apps, just not this one?
I
We can also see if he can, could you imagine if the freaking feds were in here fucking with his live stream? That would actually be crazy. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy.
I mean,
Oh, there we go.
none of that would surprise me. We've gone through this, you know. I mean,
okay, let me just test
none of that would surprise me.
Okay, it seems good on this end, right, guys? Worst case scenario, you can just yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I can tell. Okay, we're back, right? Guys, just send like alarms in the chat if it goes out again. Agent Smith is listening. Okay, you're back. All right. Let's try that again. I'm so sorry.
I'm just hella annoyed at this point, like for real. I go through this shit. I go through this shit all the time. Like telling it 3 times is fucking annoying. Needless to say, I go in the dude's room. What I will tell you is interesting about this is this dude after he went to the emergency room, this is the sort of audacity and narcissism you're dealing with these people. He asked me what I was doing in his house, and I told him I was an avenging angel for the children he molested. And this dude called a press conference and told the press everything that I had said while I was in his house. And so that's how I ended up anybody in the world knowing what to call me, the Alaskan Avenger or any of that. It came from him. He's the one that talked to the press. So that's kind of an interesting part about the whole interaction. The other thing too is I remember standing outside in handcuffs after the and they're all patting me on the back, watching the ambulance race by and thinking to myself, like, man, he's probably dead. And just having that settle into my consciousness that the rest of my life was gone. That was kind of a heavy moment too, because I never intended to kill anybody ever. That was not in my mind to be a murderer, you know? So that was kind of a very tough and interesting moment. But strangely,
so when you got in the house and the people, you got in the house and his roommates answered and you kind of hurried them back to their room. They went back into their room. What happened after that?
What do you mean what happened? I into his bedroom and I told the dude to comply and sit down, because normally I'd make him get down on their knees or sit down on the bed or whatever to prepare to receive their sermon. And he didn't want to comply. And in that moment, I realized, what's really weird is you could have put a picture of this dude next to a picture of the guy that was convicted of molesting me, and they were like spitting image of each other. It was like a mirror. And I in that moment, psychologically, I reverted back to my childhood, and I thought to myself, this time I'm not going to lose. I'm not going to lose this fight. And it was interesting because I let him swing on me a couple of times. He hit me with a couple of lumbering punches to the face. And I was like, oh, really? And I reached down into that backpack and pulled out that hammer, and I shattered his collarbone first, and he just wilted. And then I domed him a couple of times. And roundabout then, I realized, it was time to get out of that house. And so I just walked out the side light and left. And I assume the people that were in the bedroom probably had called the police right away. Again, that's not something that I was even worried about at the moment. And then by the time I got to the end of the street, the cops were just pouring in and they pulled me over immediately.
So how did the police make the connections between 3, and I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to ask you if there was more than 3, but I am very curious as to know how they made those connections, because from my understanding, these 3 targets of yours, you didn't go after them all in one night, correct? There was a bit of space between them.
Yeah, it was over the course of, like, I think it was a 3-day span, those 3. So the police already knew that somebody was actively targeting them. They knew that. And I mean, it was plainly evident when they pulled me over. There was a hammer sitting in my console of my car. You know what I mean? Like they knew exactly what it was. And if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, I think I had a notebook that had names crossed off and had more names, up to come, yet to come. So it wasn't like I was cruising around not, trying to cover my tracks. Honestly, I really wasn't.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's one thing that definitely stuck out to me, and I think what let me know that like I feel like there was a lot of genuinity in what you did is the one thing you're taught, especially about people who pretend to like be crazy, is like, people who are, kind of genuinely crazy, not calling you crazy, but will use it for the purpose of intent. When people are doing things out of their own genuine psyche, they don't necessarily take those extra steps to like try to be sneaky, try to hide shit. And to me, I think that spoke profoundly as to like what your mission was, because after when you blew up in the media, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's basically there's three different opinions, which is what people were really trying to figure out, which I think is number one, did you attack these pedophiles because you were high on meth? Did you attack them because you're just a violent person that just got off on committing violence, and so these were like easy targets, so to speak? Or whether or not you reacted out of trauma and really like what I call the Robin Hood syndrome, which is also known as like vigilante behavior,
Yeah.
I guess. And one thing to me that made it very clear to me that you didn't do it just because you're this violent guy that just loves going out committing violence is number one, you didn't conceal your identity. I think that's a big one. And number two, it would have been very easy for you to have taken their whole lives into your own hands, so to speak. You never did that. You didn't cross the boundary. You didn't kill these people. But you didn't make a huge effort in like trying to lie about what you did, trying to make excuses. You were kind of just like, well, they caught me, so it's time to be genuine about it. And that's what I always got from you, was this like this genuineness. So the public was really fighting over whether or not, it was just drug induced, or whether or not you're violent. And
Yeah.
I would say, I'm not you, but I would say that it was really out of trauma. What would you say to that? Are you a violent person? Did drugs play into it, or did you just
Yeah.
kind of snap and was like, enough's enough?
Yeah. So number one, in no way, shape, or form am I a violent person by nature at all whatsoever. I don't enjoy fighting. Honestly, I'm not particularly good at it. I'm not some sort of a ninja. I don't have a black belt in anything. It's not my favorite thing in the world at all. I will tell you that I personally had to invoke a particular energy and channel it to even go perform acts like that. Not something that is natural to my nature by any means. I will tell you 100% unequivocally, there is one reason and one reason only that I behaved in that manner, and that is due to the fact that I had trauma from my childhood that was burning like a coal in my spirit, and it had to blossom and express itself in some manner. And that's primarily the reason why I operate and say what I do with my platform nowadays, is because I know there is an ocean of us, an ocean. And one of the worst things that can possibly happen to you is if you're in bondage your entire childhood, spiritual, emotional, physical bondage as a young man, and then you grow up, and it doesn't matter how righteous it is or how necessary or how amazing it is for other people. What happens to you, it was what happened to me, is you end up living in bondage again. And this time it's physical bondage, and you go from being in bondage your whole childhood to living in a cage as an adult. And it's a
Right.
horrible, terrible thing. And the only reason why on the face of this earth that I even had the idea, the notion, the motivation, the desire, the courage to do anything that I did is because I was abused as a small child. And interestingly, again, I am no sort of whiner, nor do I sit back and criticize things that could be or should be. But what I will tell you is this: at no time in my life did the system ever reach out and ask me, "Hey, are you doing all right, kid? How are you doing after that?" No time did they send a counselor, a therapist, a state employee, a state person of any time ever to check on me, make sure I was all right, or my brother. None of them. So it's a massive hole in the system that affected my personal life later on, and that's the only reason why I was there. And again, interestingly, here's the net response from the judicial system. We presented to the court a PTSD diagnosis. We presented documented trauma and everything else, witnesses and all of that. And the court basically used both sides of the fence, and they said, number one, your PTSD and your childhood trauma is not going to mitigate your sentence in any way, shape, or form, and had nothing to do with what you did. You're just a junkie criminal. Number two, when you do get out, we want you to go get mental health evaluations and everything else to address the PTSD that you have. So it was like, okay, cool. So they literally set up a whole bunch of requirements for me to have to do later because I did have it, but they refused to acknowledging me having it as pertains to the sentencing related to the crime. Pretty sick, pretty vile. And I'll also tell you that I recall one time going to court and the prosecutor is asking for an extension of the court date because his wife was about to give birth to their first child. And in conjunction with that request, I remember the number of times that with vigor and with extra animus, this dude did every single thing in his power to absolutely destroy my character. He's just a thief. He's just a convict. He's just a junkie looking for soft targets. He knows felons aren't allowed to have guns. That's why he was going there, which is absolutely laughable because, yeah, felons don't own firearms, huh? Okay.
There's so
But
many that do, though. What?
This dude went out of his way to absolutely destroy and decimate me as a person. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, you know what, man? God forbid someday something happens to your brand new baby that you don't even love yet. And guess what? You're going to wish somebody like me was out there, and you're going to understand what I did later on the hard way. Because to people that have not experienced this sort of abuse or lived it, they cannot fathom, how dare you go do this? Well, the explanation is, go live for about a decade getting beaten by one of these guys, and you'll realize how dare I. You'll understand it right now. You will understand that the drug use in my life is not about what compelled me to do what I did. It's about me utilizing drugs to patch up old wounds because I was absolutely destroyed as a human being before I even had a chance to have a life. Of course, I got high. I self medicated most of my adult life, wouldn't you? Of course, I used drugs, wouldn't you? Of course, I did. You know what I mean? I was raised within a church structure, a religious structure that was so busy investing my young mind with mythologies and be scared of these invisible beings in this place you might go to and you're going to burn forever and all this type of weirdo shit, that they didn't pay attention to the dude that was molesting and beating the kid in the middle of all that. It's just so linear and so basic that I was shocked standing in the courtroom wondering, how the fuck are you people shocked? What else did you think a little molested kid would do when he grew up?
You're going to become fucking president, you asshole?
Right. What did you think I was going to turn out like?
Yeah, that actually reminds me of a clip of yours that I'm going to share at the end of this because I think it's like so profound, and I'm going to put it in my video too, but I want to share it with the audience. But before I do, there's something that I want to ask kind of personally, like separate from like, like Roma and Roma Army, as like Chloe, somebody who like also went through fucked up shit. One thing I'm curious about is, one thing that often comes with being heavily abused and traumatized as a young age is a lot of the times, most of the times, our perpetrators don't we don't get any kind of justice. And so a lot of the times what can happen is fantasies can develop, um, thoughts in like your most traumatized moment where you're like, maybe I should like go seek out my abuser. Like maybe like these are thoughts that like I myself have actually thought. And one thing that troubles me and makes me angry is that, you know, my mother did XYZ to me for about 8 years because I ran away like at quite a young age. But if I did that to her for a fucking even an hour, like fuck a day, if I even did that for an hour, everybody would paint me as some psycho. Nobody would consider the fact that this woman traumatized me, beat me, allowed me to be molested. Like nobody's going to think of that. So, one thing I'm super curious about is like, did it help you at all? Did it heal like anything inside of you? Did it help that like hurt child within you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and again, I have to be very, very extremely cautious how I communicate, because what I don't want to do is encourage anyone else to go out and break the law and commit acts of
Of
violence ever.
course.
But
Yeah.
what I will tell you is, and I want to separate the two. And I want to tell people, number one, that happened. It happened. I did that. That happened. But what I want to tell people is that when you sacrifice a good portion of your adult life to do something like that, yes, absolutely, it was extremely cathartic to win. 100%. It did something for my spirit that I can't really describe to others. For sure, 100%. However, I want to separate the two and tell people I did that so you don't have to. Like in your case, when you have those thoughts and things like that, well, guess what else I did at the same time? I completely abandoned my children. I had 2 kids. Their dad disappeared from their life for 10 years. I was gone. So what happened is I abandoned my kids, and they had an upbringing that didn't involve their dad at all. And so the reason why that's so important is when you have the compulsion to go mete out justice on your abuser, what you have to know is you're a mother. And what that compulsion should lead you to do actually is to convert that into being the best, most attentive, most vigilant mother that you can possibly be. That's where that compulsion should drive you. And if you want to do something to remunerate your abuser, what you do is be the most phenomenal, best on point mother that you can possibly be. That's what you do to that fucking abuser. You show the world that you can raise a couple of beautiful, intelligent, capable people that may have the opportunity to change this fucking mess that the rest of us weren't able to change. That's how you address it. That's how you do it. This point in your life, you're accountable for what you know and your position and your job, how you've developed yourself. It's like where I sit right now. I'm accountable. I've been given the opportunity to be free and do time out here in the community. So now I'm accountable for that. And so what I like to do, you guys see me on my videos. I run around with a little youngster and I'm hella hard on him and stuff like that. But I'm accountable to be a good example and to impart life wisdom to him. And that's where I'm at now. And I know it would be the worst possible thing for me to go throw what I've been given away, to do a one-time interjection on somebody's life and do my best to contribute and make that a possibility.
So if you could go back, would you have done anything different? And don't say
No,
not get caught.
no, no.
No?
And you know what? Specifically, I wouldn't. I would say no, and I wouldn't change the not getting caught part either, because getting caught and going to prison and doing all of those years in prison absolutely changed me forever. And it changed me for the better. And I will tell you this, very rarely do I give myself personally credit for much. But I will tell you this, I fucking did that. I took that prison sentence and I used it to advance myself. I sought out knowledge. I sought out.
Yeah.
I don't even regret the prison sentence. I don't resent the prison sentence. Do I think rationally it was too long? Yeah. Do I think rationally it was unfair? Yeah. But do I resent having to do the time? Absolutely not, because it cemented who I am now. And without that period of years and without what I did during those years, I wouldn't be this person I am right now. So it's a really scary and really terrible thing for me to say out loud. But honestly, I'm grateful for the 10 piece.
That's true growth right there. I always say that the things in my life that happened to me, even though they were like shitty, they made me who I am. So you can't necessarily regret them. I think that's really noble. I just want to touch on the whole idea of like a vigilante, because I think a big concern for certain people, I feel like most people are pretty happy with what you did. People in authority and other people in society, I think, have a fear of vigilante behavior, um, because I don't really know why. To be honest, I actually don't know, because to me, if the system was set up correctly, these types of things wouldn't happen. People wouldn't feel the need. Like if somebody diddles a child and they go away for life, there's not going to be people out on the street who are hunting them down. This is only happening because there's a failure within the system. So, one thing that you've always been extremely clear about in every interview you've ever done, in every like writing you've made, is that you don't encourage vigilante behavior at all. And in fact, what you encourage is the openness in conversations and the movement towards changing legislation. So if there was somebody sitting in front of us today that was thinking about going out and doing the same thing that you did, what would be your like honest advice to them?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is that's not a hypothetical question. I get questions like that 10 times a week, 8 times a week. People ask me, my niece, my daughter, my girlfriend was molested and I want to go handle that or whatever. And that's some of the part of idolizing the Alaskan Avenger title that people need to be really, really careful of. I promise you, you don't want to go live the path that I lived. You don't want to. It is painful and it hurt and it cost me everything. You don't want to live that path. And so I tell people, number one, you need to weigh the cost because it's going to cost you. If you're going to go and make that type of sacrifice and break the law in that manner, it's going to cost you. But oftentimes, all of them are somebody's brother, somebody's dad, somebody's uncle. And I tell them, if you want to invest your time and your energy in a productive manner, number one, the universe is a very dynamic system, and I promise you, the gorgeous, reliable, faithful Miss Universe returns in kind every single thing that is projected out to her. I assure you of that. And while it might not seem in this lifetime it's happening, these people have coming what they have projected. I assure you of that. You might not see it, I might not see it, but I promise you that is real. And so if you have that energy or that seed inside you, what you want to do is find someone to love better, find someone to love more, and do it where it actually matters. That's what you want to do, because that was the last thing that I learned how to do. And that was the most important thing. that I should have been shown how to do a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think your words are like so profound. I see a lot of people that try to write you off as like just a meth head that like took, and not a whole lot. There's definitely way more people that support you, but there's a good chunk of people that have tried to write you off based off of how you look, the decisions you made, but nobody, we're so quick, especially as we grow into adults, it's like people just forget a lot of the trauma that comes with it. And trauma isn't an excuse because it becomes our like responsibility one day. But I just find it interesting that nobody ever really stops to think, even for myself, people kind of look at me like they shouldn't take me seriously. They think I live in like a trailer park or something just because of my tattoos. But nobody ever really stops to ask what got them there, what made them make those decisions, like drug use, like, gang involvement, things like that. It's nothing that's ever really considered. So I find a lot of humility in you where you're able to be like, this is my story, but you don't really allow yourself to get victimized from it. And I really appreciate that about you.
Go get your hand on those old, original, beautiful gold nuggets. You're going to have to get down in the dirty, muddy water to find them. If you want some of that same old rot gold and diamonds, you can go to J.C. Penney's or you can go to Zales and you can find that shit there. But if you want some real shit, some real gold nuggets, you're going to have to get down in the dirty, muddy water and go find it. And those of us that have been in that muddy, dirty water, we're the ones that found that old gold. And if you're lucky and you're fortunate and you pay attention, and those of you that are part of this community, if you spend less time running your neck and worrying about jewelry people wear or tattoos they have or being critical and things like that, you might benefit once in a while because bad guys getting smashed out. That's great. But I'm going to tell you right now, that is very low hanging basic fruit. Bad dudes getting beat up. Hey, it feels great. Hooray. Good job. And I'm not saying we shouldn't celebrate that happening when it does. But what I am saying is that was literally the most basic part of my experience. And that was literally the least memorable and least powerful part of my experience was that moment. I did 10 years in prison and I watched bad guys get beat up 10,000 times. It's not that big a deal. It happens every single day. What is powerful and what is amazing is if a person can come from that place and get to this place where I'm able to communicate to others in the manner that they can receive it, shit that matters, shit that transforms their life. That's the part that matters.
I'm actually glad you said that because that kind of seamlessly transitions into what we were just talking about and what I want to talk about before I get to my like last question about the system and what we can do to change it. I really want to show people this clip and I'll add it into the full video. As I said, I'm going to turn this interview into more of a documentary style. So for those that aren't familiar with Jason here, can get familiar with the story and some added details that we didn't get to today. But one thing I really wanted to show, get familiar with the story and shut myself up here. I wanted to show you guys this clip. So I'm just gonna turn my screen, honestly, and show you guys because I just think it's like so profound and I really want your opinion on it. If you would just give me a second so I can pull up my browser here. I don't know where it went. Can you guys, I'm not lagging a whole bunch, am I guys? I'm good to share this clip without it being interrupted. Let me know. this is like some of the best jewels I feel like Jason has ever dropped. It's like, it's so smart. So I'm just going to turn my phone. Okay, we're great. So I'm going to turn my phone here if I can. And we're just going to watch it from my screen, because that's the only way I can give it to you guys right now, because I don't have OBS open. So I just want you guys to listen to what he has to say here.
This is very, very important for people to understand that still to this day, the system that we live with to this day is built to facilitate child predators. And it's also really important for your generation to understand no system is built by accident. Systems and factories are not built without purpose. And what they like to do is say, oh, well, yeah, we don't know how it got like that. It's weird. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're totally right. I don't know how that happened, but I'm telling you, in your state, when you fly over one of Elon Musk's factories and you see this building and this building and this building, and you wonder, why did he build that factory? What I do is I look at what comes out the end of it. I'm like, oh, shiny new Teslas. That's what he built the factory for, to produce those. Similarly, look at your system of justice. Look what comes out the end of it. That is what it was designed and built to produce. Look at me. This is what it produces. Tattooed up guys with very little hope for success. It's built to keep the warehouse full. It's built to release child predators quickly. And I'm telling you, I'm living the experience. Literally, they're telling me, God forbid we let you out because another child predator might get hurt. And to me, just hearing that message and knowing a human being actually says and thinks and feels that way, it's shocking. So it's easy to be critical of systems and it's easy to resent them. What is more difficult to do is to change them. And the thing is, these laws and these systems.
I thought that was like so profound, talking about the system and what it does, not only to like the people who go into it, but how it's like designed to protect these predators. So my next question to you is, it's kind of funny because this is what I talked to JD DeLay about in our interview that we did, is what can we do? Because a lot of us, if you're a decent human being, this should evoke a lot of anger, frustration whenever you hear the fact that not only children are getting hurt, but that their perpetrators aren't even being put on ankle monitors. They're not even going to jail. Like, they're getting such light sentences. What can we do as a society to start to evoke any sort of change to protect children that isn't vigilante behavior? Because obviously, number one, vigilante behavior isn't accepted. But the biggest thing for me is vigilante behavior can only happen after a child has been harmed. So how can we prevent it? And how can we change the system so these pedophiles are like actually being taken care of by the system? Not taken care of in a pampered way, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The fact of the matter is, number one, I don't know much about legislation and changing laws. Matter of fact, I can't even vote. I lost my voting rights. But for those people out there that do, I think it's pretty basic, and we could all probably agree fairly easily that it's one strike, you're out when it comes to people that sexualize kids. One strike, you're out.
Yeah.
If you're convicted of sexually molesting a child, goodbye. You go live in prison the rest of your life where there's no kids. There is no reason why any society ever anywhere should say, okay, that's what this dude has the compulsion to do. Let's go ahead and watch him and let him back out into the community. That makes no sense whatsoever. It's not rational. It's not normal. It should be the easiest thing in the world for us as voters to immediately start pushing our politicians that, check this out, we want a one strike, you're out rule when it comes to our children, period.
Yeah.
Bottom line. Number two, the fundamental issue, and I will tell you this, I did an informal social survey during my years in the penitentiary. Penitentiaries address drug addiction, they address drug addiction, they address drug addiction. That's it. Well, you know why people are using drugs? Because they have complex childhood PTSD. You know why they're having anger issues? because they have complex childhood PTSD. You know what you cannot get in prison? Any counseling or therapy for complex childhood PTSD. It is the fundamental foundation of criminal behavior. Literally.
Yeah.
80% of criminals of all types, and I'm including rapists, child molesters, bank robbers. And number two, I suggest start thinking about developing programs that address specifically the underlying cause for all crime in your country, and that is unaddressed, unresolved effects from childhood trauma. That's the number one underlying factor right there, more than any other thing. So the sooner we get to that place, the better. And then on a very personal level, on a very simple level, literally it's this simple. Be the dad or the mom to your kids that you never had. Be that. Be that. And if I had the chance to go back, and if I had the chance, if I was raising somebody else's kids, every day in my life, if I'm around one or I'm near one, I am the dad that I wish that I would have had in these kids' lives when I encounter them or I spend time with them. That's what I am. I tell them the things that nobody ever said to me. I give them the advice that was never given to me. I mean, like, look, I spent 3 or 4 nights a week, 8 or 12 hours a week in a church building somewhere, being drilled with a 3,000-year-old mythology about invisible beings and places. Do you know if they would have invested those same hours teaching me good personal hygiene, how to maintain a credit score, and career selection and advancement to that career, if I would have had those hours on those three things, I would be a very different, successful human being right now.
Yeah.
And it's just fucking bizarre to me that none of that was ever said. Like, my simple advice for kids, it's super powerful and super duper simple. Number one, don't break the law. Period. Don't break the law. That's number one. That means you're not getting high when nobody's looking because you're breaking the law. That means you're not wrecking your mom's car drunk because you just broke the law. So number one, don't break the law. Number two, maintain good dental hygiene. And I know that sounds stupid, but if you have a badass set of teeth, when you go to the job interview, you're going to get bumped up to the top of the list. When you go to buy a car, you're going to get treated well. When you go to the store, people are going to deal with you differently because you got a fresh ass, nice set of well maintained teeth. I'm telling you right now, good dental hygiene and don't break the law will carry you to places that I will never be.
What about advice to people? I think the number one, because one thing I talked to JD a lot about was about prevention, because that's important to me as somebody that was targeted as a child and even targeted as a youth. I think a lot of people don't really know, but I was a victim of, like, I hate that word too. I'm with you. I like wince when I hear it, but I was definitely perpetrated against by women. It wasn't just men. And I think this is something that, like, I speak heavily about female predators that are out there, because it's like freaking everywhere. And one thing for me is, again, it's just about that prevention. So with my own children, I take the extra step of I don't just say, don't go sit on the stranger's lap. Don't get in a car. Don't do this. Don't do that. A lot of the time, that's where the conversation ends. And although it's good, what happens is if a lot of the people who are molesting these children are in their family. So these children are sitting on uncle, on grandpa, on dad, or on mom's lap. And what we forget to say is, number one, it could be somebody in your family, but number two, if any of these boundaries I've given you are crossed, that I'm not mad at you. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
Because one thing I learned
Yeah.
is that when you're told, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, if it does happen, nobody says, hey, it's actually not your fault. It's the adult's responsibility. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of internalized shame where they're like, oh, well, but I did this. I shouldn't have done that. So for me, it's important to teach my kids not only here are the boundaries, but if you cross them, I won't be mad at you. You need to tell me it's not your fault. But
Yeah.
also extending it and saying, anybody could cross, could, like, this goes for anybody. It could be grandpa, it could be mom, it could be my boyfriend, it could be anybody. And I think we forget to extend that conversation to our children about
Yeah.
family members, about neighbors. Growing up, I had a lot of kids that talked about their first exposure to like pornography was going over to their friend's house and their friend was showing them this shit. So there's
Yep.
bigger conversations I think we need to have with children and with youth and also with adults on, you touched on it amazingly in the beginning, which is if you see something, do something, because we're coming
Yeah.
out of a society where people just mind their own business, and we're now in social media where people would almost prefer to take a video than actively do something. So
Yeah.
for me,
Well,
it's about reteaching.
yeah, and something that goes along with that is you will find me people that are on my platforms or listen to me. I have a mantra which is simple is genius, and the reason why is because simple things are very, very devastatingly powerful. So something that's very simple as pertains to kids is one of the things that everybody has heard, at least in a cursory way, is nobody's allowed to touch your no-no spot. Nobody should touch you here or here. And you hear that as a kid. Well, what's very, very simple that parents do not do, when I was a kid, nobody told me this, no matter who was around me, is hey, kids, there are people out there in this world that will try to touch you in these places or put you in positions where they can. Nobody told me that there was a different type of person out there that is a monster that will try to do this to me. You be very direct and very simple. And I don't mean create a world where your kids are terrified all the time,
No.
but they need to know that adults, not all adults in positions of authority are right all the time. Because that's another thing that happens to a child is you believe everybody that's a grown up is the boss and everybody that's a grown up is right. Somebody has to teach you there are people out there that will try to put you in these type of positions. Make sure you tell mom if you ever are around anyone where you feel uncomfortable. If any of your friends tells you something bad is happening to them, come and tell your mom. Make sure you do. And I don't care if they ask you to please don't tell anybody, it's going to get me in trouble or whatever, you come tell me. Those are
Right.
sort of things that it's really important to empower your children with. Because we had a friend circle and there was a whole bunch of stuff that we never told any adults. If I had a cool ass mom that told me, hey, make sure you come and tell me if you hear any of your friends are in danger or in trouble or in a bad circumstance, come tell me, please. um, I would have loved that. That would have empowered me. I didn't have that sort of upbringing, but that's a tool you can use with your children is encourage them. Come and tell me. It's super important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think definitely expanding that conversation, because at the end of the day the goal is obviously to have less children perpetrated against, obviously. It's just it's a tricky thing to navigate. So now that you're out of, you're out of prison, you're kind of free. You have an ankle monitor, but you can go places. You have to schedule things. Like you're a free-ish man. I'm gonna say ish because it's ish. But what are your goals like for the future? Where do you want to take this? Like the people watching that are just getting invested in you and want to follow you. Like what are you gonna bring in the future? What do you want to do with this?
Yeah.
With what you've
So
been given?
yeah. So first of all, extremely grateful and extremely humbled by the opportunity to be free. Compared to the last majority of the 10 years of my life, I was absolutely not free. Trust me, this is freedom. And what I intend to do is build a community that is big enough and massive enough where our voice can change laws and change things. I intend to leave something behind me when I pass away that changes things forever. Um, and so that happens brick by brick. You have to build the community first. An interesting point. Do you know the single largest body of humanity on the face of this earth, bigger than any government, bigger than any army, bigger than any country, are the survivors of childhood sexual abuse? We are the biggest group of people on the face of the earth. We are bigger than them. And one of the key goals that I have on the daily is to remind us we are bigger than them. They cannot fuck with us. There are so many of us that if we all found each other and we're the community that we are, we decide. We're the deciders. There's more of us than them. And that's why I really want to drive the point home how sad it is for us to sit back and talk about how messed up the systems are and how terrible the thing is. Well, guess what? Sadly, it's our fault because we are bigger than them. We should have been more active. We should have been more connected. We should have.
Yeah.
We should have. And as soon as we own that responsibility, then we will connect and we will create that family and that community, and then we will change things. So on the daily, I remind people that's the reason why I use that one light handle. People ask me all the time, what does one light mean? What does one light mean?
Yeah,
It
I
can
see
be
everybody
very
commenting
complicated.
hashtag one light. I never knew.
Huh?
I didn't know what it meant.
Huh? Look in the cupboards. It can be very simple or very complicated. I promise you this, when I get up in the morning, what's shining down on me is the same light that's shining down on you and everybody else on this planet. We are under one light, all of us. And it does not matter if you're Republican, Democrat, gay, straight, trans, whatever. None of that stuff matters. It does not matter. We are all under one light. And the thing is, the sooner people realize that and actually live it, the better off we'll be. You realize right now, this very second, we're the largest voting bloc in the world, us. If we created a voting bloc that was survivors of childhood sexual abuse, we're the biggest one in the world. Yeah. Our opinion matters more than any other group's opinion right here, right now. It does, right this second. Yeah. So we just have to find each other and make it happen. And I believe in miracles because I've seen miracles happen in my life. And I believe that is something that is not outside the bounds of reality. I believe it is possible to create that community and make the changes, simple ones, that we need. In my mind, in my world, it's not that big a deal. Oh, they don't address the primary underlying cause of all crime in the world. Well, then let's address it. It's not that hard. Let's start providing complex childhood PTSD therapy in prisons. Done. Yeah. The biggest body of humanity on the face of the earth is survivors of childhood abuse. Cool. Well, then let's create that as a denominator, and then we have it. We exist, and let's start voting accordingly. You know what I mean? Like, there's people whose primary issue is whether this politician believes in abortion or not, or whether this politician is a Democrat or not. That's their primary issue. What if your primary issue was whether they respect the sacred nature of a child's existence? What if that was your primary issue? It's pretty important.
I agree. I want to ask you one last question before we read the super chats and close out here. So this is kind of the last reminder for anybody that wants to ask Jason a question or myself before we hop off this live stream. Now is the time. You can send it in via super chat. We have a bunch of super chats here that we're going to read. I wanted to ask you one last question as a men's rights advocate. I'm constantly, as a woman, I have constantly and repetitively throughout my life heard a lot of advocacy towards girls, a lot of speaking about girls who have been victimized and perpetrated. And one thing that I find special about you is that you've brought male and female victims of these crimes together in one space with no competition, which, let me tell you, is extremely, extremely hard to do. So for us to like all be in one place and be able to support each other and empathize off of each other, I think is very special. But what I wanted to ask is, boys and men, masculinity is driven very hard into them, and a big part of, you know, masculinity nowadays is like, you know, being heterosexual, and everything's like, oh, that's gay, bro, you're gonna let this guy do that. And what this actually does for male victims, especially male victims of male perpetrators, is creates a lot of shame, a lot of isolation, a lot of silence. And what would your message be to somebody? Not only that, they're also in society out here outside of this community absolutely shit on. There's a guy that I'm going to add to this video when I put it in. This guy talks about how he was aggressively molested starting at the age of 12 by his foster mom, and his whole Instagram is full of people telling him he should have liked it, he should stop bitching, he should be grateful that an older woman gave him that experience, even though he was a 12-year-old fucking child and that was his foster mom. What message do you have for either young men or even grown men that have experienced this, and how they can start to speak about it without that shame? Yeah.
I mean, the first thing, number one, is anytime, anywhere throughout the course of your day or your life, if you hear or see or encounter commentary like that, that is the speak of an ignorant simpleton. So you should disregard it immediately. These are not people who are educated or even have a small amount of rationality or IQ or intelligence in any way, shape, or form. To get into any community and start deriding people that are victims of something terrible is pretty basic and pretty ignorant and pretty stunted. So I disregard all that offhand. Yeah. Number two, being ashamed of something terrible that happened to you is not sensible. And you absolutely, I challenge any man to quickly arrive at the place that you realize how nonsensible that is for you to feel that way. You got hit by a car. Are you ashamed of that? You got bit by a snake. Are you ashamed of that? You got molested by a monster. Why would you be ashamed of that?
Yeah.
You didn't do it. You didn't choose it. Something fucking happened to you. Yeah. And the thing is, if you don't tell somebody what happened to you, no one can help you heal. You can run around, you just touched a poisonous bush and that poison is in your system. And throughout the course of your life, it is making you more and more sick, and it is taking away more and more of your quality of life. And if you don't ever open up and speak to anyone that you have been poisoned, you are going to continue to lose quality of life every single day. Bottom line. And then the way that you get to that place is you have to understand it is just factual. It is a fact. Something happened to you. It's a fact. You notify somebody around you that loves you that this fact occurred, and then that person can share some of the load and you can start healing. That's how it works. That's literally the only way it works. The longer you carry the poison around inside you and you don't tell anyone, the sicker you're going to get. And then your happiness and your joy and your peace dies first. And then eventually, physically, after your spiritual death and your emotional death, physically, you're going to die too. That's how that works. And so I challenge any of those men. And number two, just so everybody knows, I am not a bitch made pussy, and I don't expect you to be either. So honestly, it's time to let your nuts hang and actually be a man about it. And if something happened to you, speak up, man. Yeah. Say so. Let somebody that cares about you know that this is inside you, this poison, and this is what you've been dealing with. And then seek out and get healing for that. Seek out and get therapy for that. And if not for yourself, if it's so deeply entrenched that you don't care about yourself enough to do that, then do it for the person that you love. Do it for your wife's sake. Do it for your kids' sake. And absolutely, I agree with you. Be a man about it. That's the bottom line. We do live in a world where there are men and there are women, and you're expected to behave and conduct yourself like a man. So do so. Be a man. This hurt me. This continues to hurt me. I would like it to no longer hurt me. It's simple. It's not complicated. The way things get more complicated and more buried and more poisonous is when we make them that way. It's not that complicated. Like, I'll tell anybody, check this out. When I was a little kid, I got beat with 2x4s and molested for a number of years. And thank God the dude didn't try to stick it in my butt, because I don't have to live with that memory.
I'm
And
so
thank God
sorry.
he just tried to touch my wiener, because it's a
Yeah.
good thing he didn't try to make me suck his dick. It's a good thing, because that
Yeah.
would have been worse. And I don't mind saying that to people because it's reality. And if
Yeah.
it's hard on your ears to hear that, I totally understand it. But that's facts, man. That is
Yeah.
facts. That's some of the way I came to terms with what happened to me, is literally I'm giving you out loud some of my own self-talk. Thank God I didn't have to suck the guy's dick. For real. Thank
Yeah.
God he didn't try to stick it in my butt. I literally have self-talked myself like that over the years, and that's what allowed me to heal. And I'm not ashamed of anything that happened to me. I'm just sad that some sick fuck walked the earth and had that compulsion, and it took that long for him to stop sucking my air, because it took a long time. I don't know how old he was when he passed away, but it was a good long time.
So he's no longer around.
No, and a really strange twist of reality. While I was sitting in pretrial waiting to be sentenced, I got a letter under the door that notified me that he had passed away.
Did that affect you?
Absolutely. I woke up the next morning and the world was a better place.
Did you have any sort of complicated feelings about that?
Not at all. I mean,
No.
to be perfectly candid with you, how I found out was the woman who birthed me, who stayed with this dude the entire course of his life until he passed away, which is another really sick thing. Any mother who would stay with the guy who was convicted of molesting her own children is another diseased, twisted mentality that I cannot rationalize.
Absolutely.
I hadn't spoken to her in 15 or 20 years, and she wrote me a letter, and it said something like, "Your father passed away and he left you a note if you'd like to have it. I just thought I would ask you." And so I wrote her back and I told her, for real, I told her, number one, I don't want to hear anything from you ever again unless it's an explanation of why you stayed with that man until he passed away. Number two, the only thing that I regret is that I was not in the room to hold the pillow over his face when he took his last breath. For real. And any child, any small child that survived something like that from a person like that, there would be something wrong with you if you didn't feel that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
for sure. Yeah, I put myself in your shoes, and I think, yeah, of course, there would be like a thank God they're not here anymore.
yeah.
Sometimes there can be conflicting feelings with that. So I'm glad that it brought you peace. If anything, I'm sorry you
Yeah.
went through that, but I am glad that it brought you
I
peace.
mean, really, like, for real, the next morning when I got up, I had this moment of realization that that thing was nowhere on the face of this earth anymore. And it really felt like a lighter, better world. It's a strange thing to describe, but it was like I could breathe deeper or something. It's just a really strange thing, but it's true.
Yeah. Well, we've been here for 3 hours? That's 3 hours. So I won't take up too much of your time. Thank you again for sitting down and like talking and giving me like your first interview since prison. It actually means like a lot to me. You're very much people like really, I don't want to use the word idolized because it makes me uncomfortable when people use it, but people really look up to you. And I think one thing even I said when I first FaceTimed you and met you is that there's something about your presence in this earth that kind of heals that like broken child in all of us. Anybody who has been through that feels that kind of like vindication with you, like, yeah, he got him. Even though it wasn't our perpetrator, there's a little bit of like fear that's evoked in these pedophiles. And I think that that's fantastic. I'm not angry at that at all. So,
Yeah.
with that being said, I will read these super chats here. You guys sent a lot. My goodness. A lot of you didn't even send questions. You just straight up sent super chats, which is awesome. Thank you. So let's read the first one. The first one is from Trev the Tyrant. He says, "Love both y'all. This interview is great. I hope everyone who has not subbed to Jason yet does. He's a solid dude, right up there with JD Delay." I agree. So you can find him on Instagram. His Instagram is The Real Alaskan Avenger. And then here on YouTube, it's just the Alaskan Avenger, correct?
Yeah.
There's a lot of copycats. So if you guys want to go back to this live stream after, I'll put all of his links. My moderator also just dropped his Patreon. Please consider supporting. That's where you can kind of have like the most, you can get to know Jason like the best throughout his content. And it always helps us as creators. The second one is from Tyler Reimer. Sorry if I'm not saying that right. It says, don't ever be silenced. Keep the message going. Hell yeah. That's what conversations like this are for.
For sure.
Dissolute void. What does that say? I don't know. I'm dyslexic, so pardon me. Roma doing interviews, something I can get behind. Why, thank you so much. Tom Lennon just sent one in. It says, Jason is a natural treasure. Protect this legend. I agree. Chrissy Mendez says, Jason, here's a hug, brother. Love you.
Nice. I know, Chrissy. Love you, sis.
Allison Nunnally says, question for Jason. How did you become our most favorite family member? Your community is so nice.
Well, Allison always comes through with the dad jokes every week, so I'm kind of disappointed. I thought there'd be a dad joke in there.
Amy Powers says, act boldly, be courageous, stay true to yourself.
True to yourself. Yeah.
Is that what you say?
That's a Jason Vukovich quote, yeah. I started answering letters for years that way, and I told everybody, act boldly, be courageous, and stay true to yourself. And that's a really important thing to internalize, because sometimes along the way, staying true to yourself is very difficult. You end up questioning yourself. And when there's that much opposition and that much criticism, you start thinking, man, maybe they are right. Maybe I am just a piece of shit drug addict. And you really have to be strong to make it through. You have to.
The next one, I really like this one. It's from Tanya. She says, also tell your children not to believe the threats that predators might make, like they will hurt their family if they tell. That's interesting that you say that, because when I teach my daughter, I have a lot of conversations, not enough to traumatize her, but we keep up in the conversations. And one thing I tell her is that anybody who's trying to hurt you will most likely make threats like, I'm going to hurt your family, or your mommy will be mad at you. And I always say to her, like, they are the ones that are going to get in trouble. And so my daughter said hi to you on FaceTime, and she asked me after, like, who is this guy? And I explained a little bit. And so she's like, oh, mommy, you're right. These people do get hurt for hurting children. Like, this is a special case, sweetheart. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Amanda Manuel. Oh, that's it. I thought that said game. Oh, it says game over. It's a sticker that says game over. Thank you. Someone says, Roma, you're beautiful. Thanks for everything you do. Shucks. Thank you. Tom Lennon again. Jason is a national treasure. Protect this legend. Tom Lennon again. Goddamn, Tom Lennon is popping off. He says, I have a chomo. A chomo. I'm dyslexic, in case you guys haven't noticed. I confuse my words. I have a chomo on the loose in New York that beat the charges. Please help on my stepdaughter. What? So wait, are you saying that your daughter was perpetrated against and he's loose in New York? Is that what he's saying?
That's what it sounds like.
What would your advice be?
I don't know if this is the place to be communicating like that, Tom, but I suggest you try again and be persistent when it comes to law enforcement and people that victimize kids. There's different prosecutors that come into office, and you might have resistance one year, and next year you can have success. That's literally the best advice I can give you.
Yeah, it's like shitty. It's one of those things where you want to say, like, trust the system and keep your faith, but the system.
No, none of those things. You can't trust the system or keep faith in it, but you have to be persistent and push it. That's what you have to do.
Yeah. Well, that concludes. So I want to thank you, Jason, for taking time to be here with crazy
For
old
sure.
me.
For sure. I had a good time. Thank you for having me. Appreciate everybody showing up.
Yeah. I'm excited to turn this into more of a long form and share some more details with you guys that aren't familiar with Jason and more of his story. And yeah, thank you for showing up here today. We had a lot of people tune in, like a lot actually.
Seemed like there was quite a few people cycling through, yeah. Even though we had to wrestle with YouTube to make it happen.
That was crazy. I'm literally so embarrassed. That's never happened. And out of all interviews, I just couldn't believe it.
Wild. That's wild. Well, you're dealing with a light bulb. That's what happens.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for everybody else who tuned in. I will be reposting this, so if there's parts that you guys missed, you guys can rewatch it, and stay tuned for that full video. And make sure you support Jason on Patreon. I'm a Patreon of his, and I quite enjoy his Patreon, so you guys should definitely check it out.
Love you guys. One light.
See ya.
All right.